Howdy folks. You're watching Eclipse Wizardry. Sit tight because today we bring you, what if Fleur rescued Harry from Dursleys at age 9 and Veela protection magic permanently bonded them as mates. Smash that like, subscribe, and enjoy the ride. Chapter 1. The smell of something burning. The car Apolline Delacour had hired smelled of pine air freshener and old leather, and it moved through the English suburbs with the kind of grinding slowness that made Fleur want to open the door and walk the rest of the way on principle. "You are scowling," her mother said, without looking up from the parchment in her lap. "I am not scowling. This is my face." "Your face is scowling." Fleur turned back to the window. The streets out here were relentlessly identical, same brick walls, same clipped hedges, same net curtains twitching as the car passed. She had been in England for 2 days on what her mother called a diplomatic errand and what Fleur privately called a punishment for skipping ancient runes revision. The British Ministry of Magic had some tedious dispute with the French Veela Council about territorial designations along the Channel coast, and Apolline, who was the council's most eloquent representative and also the most intimidating woman in 3 countries, had been asked to come and settle it quietly. She had brought Fleur because she said the experience would be educational. Fleur suspected it was because she didn't trust her to stay home unsupervised. "Why are we in this part of the city?" Fleur asked. "I thought the ministry contact lived in London." "He does. We are making a detour." Apolline finally looked up. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, and she had done something subtle with her Veela glamour that made her look like a very elegant English solicitor rather than what she was. "There is a child here I have been asked to check on." "A child? A wizarding child? A significant one?" She folded the parchment. "The Flamel Institute tracks orphaned magical children in muggle custody. They flagged a concern some months ago and asked if I would verify it while I was in the area. It is a small thing." "And the child's name?" Apolline looked at her in the way she sometimes did, measuring, careful. "Harry Potter." Fleur knew the name. Everyone in the magical world knew the name. He was the boy who had survived the killing curse at age 1, the boy who had ended the war before he could walk properly. There were children's books about him in France. There were commemorative plates. "He lives here?" Fleur looked back out at the identical houses. "In this place?" "Apparently so." The car stopped. "Number 4, Privet Drive." The house was indistinguishable from every other house on the street except that the garden was slightly more aggressively maintained, the kind of lawn that wanted you to know how much effort it represented. There was a shining new car in the driveway. The curtains in the front window were drawn precisely in half, as though someone had measured them. Fleur stepped out of the hired car and felt it immediately. It wasn't a smell, exactly. It was more like the absence of something, the way a room feels when someone has just stopped crying, that particular flatness in the air. Her Veela senses, sharper than they'd been 2 years ago when her inheritance had first come in, prickled at it the way a finger prickles when it nears a nettle. Something here was wrong. She didn't say anything. She followed her mother up the garden path and waited while Apolline rang the bell, her parchment tucked under one arm, her expression pleasantly blank. The woman who answered was thin in a way that looked deliberate, like she'd worked very hard at it. Horse-faced, with a neck that seemed slightly too long, and eyes that swept over Apolline and Fleur with immediate suspicion. "Yes?" "Good afternoon," Apolline said, in her most disarming English. "My name is Apolline Delacour. I am a welfare representative conducting a routine check on a child in your care, a Harry Potter. I have documentation if you would like to see it." She produced a very convincing-looking Muggle social services letter that Fleur knew perfectly well had been conjured that morning over breakfast. The woman, Petunia, Fleur would learn, did something complicated with her face. Several emotions crossed it in quick succession: alarm, anger, calculation, and then a smile that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. "Of course," she said. "Do come in." The inside of the house was immaculate. The kind of immaculate that spoke of enormous, continuous effort, not because the people who lived here liked cleanliness but because mess was the enemy and order was the weapon. Everything had a place. Everything was in its place. There were photographs on the wall going up the staircase, a large blond boy at various ages, grinning, growing, always centered in the frame. A man with no neck in a series of increasingly expensive-looking suits. The thin woman at various occasions, always slightly smiling. No one else. "He's in the kitchen," Petunia said, leading them down the hall. "Doing his chores." Fleur's Veela senses went from a prickle to something considerably sharper. The kitchen was bright and clean and smelled of bleach underneath the lingering scent of whatever had been made for lunch, something fried, by the residue in the pan sitting in the drying rack. At the sink, standing on a small step stool because he was apparently not quite tall enough to reach it properly, was a boy. He was 9 years old and he was too small for 9. That was the first thing. He was the kind of small that didn't come from genetics but from something else, the way a plant goes pale and thin when it doesn't get enough light. He was wearing clothes that might have fit a boy twice his size, an enormous gray t-shirt hanging off one shoulder, trousers belted so tight the waist bunched like a paper bag. His dark hair was aggressively untidy in the way that suggested it never got cut properly. He was scrubbing a pot with focused, methodical intensity, the way someone scrubs something when they know what happens if they don't. He didn't look up when they came in. "Harry," Petunia said, in a voice like a nail gun. "We have visitors. Say hello." The boy turned. His eyes were green. Startlingly, brilliantly green, behind glasses that were held together at the bridge with a piece of sticky tape. And the thing that hit Fleur like a step into cold water, they were completely unafraid. He looked at them both with the frank, assessing gaze of someone who has learned to read rooms very quickly, cataloging them in 2 seconds, and then he said, quietly and with reasonable politeness, "Hello." There was a bruise on his forearm. Faded to yellow-green, a week old at least, but shaped wrong for an accidental knock. Too even, too deliberate. Fleur's magic moved. It was not something she decided to do. The Veela inheritance worked on instinct at the edges, glamour, allure, fire when genuinely threatened, and this was something she had never felt before. It started in her chest, warm and urgent, like the moment before crying but without the grief. It moved outward through her blood like heated water and then it reached. That was the only word for it. It reached, across the kitchen, toward the boy, and something in him reached back. Harry Potter blinked. He looked at her with those green eyes and something flickered in them that wasn't quite recognition and wasn't quite surprise. Like hearing a word in a language you didn't know you spoke. Apolline went very still. "Harry," she said, gently, stepping forward and crouching to his level in a way that made her look less imposing without being condescending, "I'm Apolline. I've come to see how you're getting on. Is it all right if I ask you a few questions?" "I suppose," Harry said, glancing at Petunia, who was standing in the doorway with an expression that was working very hard to be neutral. "Could you show me your room?" "He has," Petunia started. "Madam." Apolline looked up, and for just a moment the diplomacy fell away and something older and sharper was visible underneath it. "I would like to speak with the child privately. This is standard procedure." The word standard landed with the specific weight of "do not argue with me." Petunia showed them where the stairs were. Harry led them up without looking back, without speaking, moving through the house with the particular economy of someone who has learned to take up as little space as possible. He stopped at a door on the landing and opened it. It was a cupboard. Under the stairs, accessible from a small door half hidden behind the staircase itself. There was a cot inside. A thin blanket. A single bare bulb. On the wall, in a child's careful handwriting, small pencil marks, a height chart. And next to it, a small shelf with 3 things on it, a stub of pencil, a library book about foxes, and a toy soldier with a broken leg. Nobody said anything for a moment. Harry stood in the doorway of his cupboard and looked at them with those calm green eyes and said, without any particular inflection, "It's not as small as it looks. I've measured." Fleur's magic detonated. Not outwardly, she didn't set anything on fire, though for a single scorching second it was a very near thing. It detonated inward, through the bond that had just snapped shut between them like a door slamming, ancient and absolute and enormous. She had heard of guardian bonds only in the theoretical sense, the way you hear about things that happened in history and assume they will never happen to you. They were the oldest form of Veela protective magic, predating civilization, predating language. The bond a Veela forms when they encounter someone who is theirs to protect in a way that goes deeper than choice. It happened rarely. It happened permanently. And it was currently happening to her in a cupboard under some stairs in the worst suburb she had ever seen. She grabbed the door frame. Apolline was at her side in an instant, one hand on her elbow, and their eyes met, and her mother's face was complicated. There was shock there, and then something that was not quite awe but was adjacent to it. She looked at Harry, then back at Fleur, and something passed over her features that Fleur didn't have the vocabulary to name. Harry was watching Fleur with that direct, assessing gaze. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am fine," Fleur said, because she was going to have the rest of her life to not be fine about this, and right now other things were more pressing. "You went a bit white." "I am French. We are often pale." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, more like the memory of what a smile might feel like. Apolline crouched again, right there in the hallway, level with him. Her voice was quiet enough that it wouldn't carry to wherever Petunia was hovering. "Harry. I need to ask you something important, and I need you to tell me the truth. Are you safe here?" He considered this question with the seriousness of someone who has learned that adults asking it usually already know the answer. "Define safe," he said. Apolline closed her eyes briefly. Then she stood up. She walked down the stairs with the unhurried certainty of someone who has already decided what she is about to do. Fleur heard her heels on the kitchen tiles, heard the murmur of her voice and then Petunia's voice rising, and then something changed in the sound of the house, something atmospheric, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. Fleur looked at Harry. Harry looked at Fleur. "What's your name?" he asked. "Fleur." "Fleur," he repeated, testing it. "Like the word for flower?" "Yes." "That's a bit fancy." "Yes," she agreed. "It is." "Why did you grab the door frame?" She looked at him. 9 years old, too small, tape-mended glasses, a bruise on his arm that she was going to think about later when she had somewhere private to be angry. Watching her with those impossible green eyes like he had absolutely nothing to lose by asking a direct question. She had been prepared to spend the next several years being condescending to him. That, she recognized now, was going to be an entirely different situation than she'd imagined. "Something happened," she said. "Something magical. I will explain it to you when I understand it better myself." He nodded, accepting this with a composure that no 9-year-old should have and which told her more about his life than the cupboard had. "Are you going to take me somewhere?" he asked. "Yes." "Good," Harry said. He went back into the cupboard, retrieved the library book about foxes and the toy soldier, and tucked them into his too-large shirt. He looked at the height chart on the wall for a moment, then turned away without ceremony. He was packed, in the way that someone is packed when they have learned not to own anything they can't carry. The sounds from the kitchen had escalated. Fleur went first, Harry following. The scene in the kitchen was something Fleur absorbed in pieces. Vernon Dursley had arrived, a vast, purple-faced man in weekend clothes who was standing by the refrigerator with the specific posture of someone who is accustomed to filling a room with presents and has just discovered it isn't working. Petunia was by the window. Between them, Apolline stood with her arms loosely at her sides, and if you didn't know what you were looking at you might have missed the fact that she had dropped every scrap of the diplomatic persona and was now simply and entirely a Veela whose threat response had been activated. She was not visibly doing anything dramatic. She didn't need to. The temperature of the room had dropped, and the light seemed to fall differently around her, and both Dursleys looked the way people look when they have just understood that they have made an error of categorization, that what they assumed was a bureaucratic inconvenience is something considerably older and more dangerous. You cannot just, you have no legal, Vernon was saying, and his voice had the bluster of a man who has won many arguments by sheer volume and cannot understand why it isn't working. I have every legal and extra-legal authority I require, Apolline said, pleasantly. And I am trying very hard to have this conversation in a civilized manner. I would appreciate it if you would assist me in that effort. He's our nephew. He lives here. We took him in, which is more than anyone else was willing to. I am aware of what you took him in for. Apolline's pleasantness thinned slightly. The Blood Ward. The magical protection his presence provides this house. Yes. I have read the Flamel Institute's analysis in considerable detail. She paused. And I will note, for the record, that a blood ward functions on voluntary residence. It requires that the child choose to call this place home. Looking at the evidence of that child's home, I find myself wondering whether that ward has been functional for quite some time. Something crossed Vernon's face. She had found something true. He leaves with us today, Apolline said. You will provide no resistance. You will sign nothing, contest nothing, and report nothing to anyone. In return, I will not file a formal complaint with either the British or French magical authorities, which would result in this house and everything in it being subject to a very thorough review. She tilted her head slightly. Do we understand each other? Vernon looked like a man trying to decide whether to call a bluff, running the numbers, not finding them in his favor. Fine, he said. The word came out like something being ripped off a wall. Petunia said nothing. She was looking at Harry in the doorway, and her expression was, not guilt, not exactly. Something guiltier than guilt. The thing underneath it that guilt is the thin cover for. Harry looked back at her for a moment. Then he walked through the kitchen, past the shining hobs and the bleached countertops and the family photographs that didn't include him, and he didn't look at either of them again. Fleur walked behind him. As she passed the kitchen table, she felt the bond hum in her chest, warm and certain and absolute, like a compass finding north, and she understood, with the particular clarity of something you know is going to change your life forever, that nothing about this was going to be simple. She was also beginning to understand that simple was not what either of them had been made for. The hired car was still outside. Apolline had the driver wait while she made 2 brief, precise calls on her mobile, to the French Veela Council and to the Flamel Institute respectively, and then she joined them in the back. Harry sat between them, the Fox book in his lap, looking out the window as Privet Drive slid away behind them. He didn't wave. He didn't look back. He just watched the identical houses pass until they didn't. Where are we going? He asked. London first. There are things to arrange. Apolline looked at him with the direct warmth she had that Fleur had spent 16 years learning to receive without it making her cry. Then France. Our home. Are you all right with that? Harry thought about it. A long, honest pause. Are there cupboards there? For storage. Yes. Do people sleep in them? No. Then I'm all right with it, Harry said. They were on the motorway when the magic started. It began as warmth in Fleur's breastbone, the bond, she was learning its language in real time, and then it spread, and she realized it wasn't coming from her. It was coming from Harry. He was sitting very still, watching the road, and his magic was bleeding off him in slow, steady waves the way heat bleeds from a stone that's been in the sun. Apolline could feel it. She put her hand over her own sternum briefly, a small unconscious gesture. Even the driver, fully muggle, was holding the wheel slightly tighter than necessary, responding to the atmospheric pressure of it. It wasn't threatening. It was, she searched for the word, relieved. Like something exhaling that hadn't exhaled in years. Harry, Fleur said quietly. Your magic is showing. He looked at his hands, which were not visibly doing anything. Then he looked at her. Sorry. I don't always know when it's happening. It is all right. I am only telling you so you know. He nodded. He turned back to the window. But after a moment, with the complete lack of self-consciousness of someone who has had no one to perform composure for, he said, "It does that sometimes when I feel safe. The magic, I mean. It sort of comes out." Fleur looked out her own window and said nothing, because her throat had done something inconvenient. The London arrangements took 2 hours. Apolline was efficient and relentless and moved through the Ministry of Magic's international visitor facilities like a woman who has paperwork as a weapon. Harry sat in an anteroom with Fleur and ate, with focused intensity, 3 sandwiches from the visitor cafeteria and a packet of crisps, the way someone eats who has learned not to assume the next meal is coming. He didn't talk much, but when he did it was worth listening to. He asked about France, not the tourist questions but oddly specific ones, like whether it was cold there at night and whether the neighbors were close by. He asked how big Fleur's family was. When she told him it was her mother, and her younger sister Gabrielle, he seemed to do some private calculation and then relax slightly. "Small families are easier," he said. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, the large shirt shifting off his shoulder again. "More people means more noise. More noise means more chances to do something wrong." He said it matter-of-factly, the way you discuss weather patterns. The thing underneath it was terrible and he didn't seem to know that it was. Fleur picked up the packet of crisps from where he'd left it, finished the last few, and handed the empty packet back without comment. He looked at her sideways. "Those were mine." "You were finished." "I might not have been." "You put it down." "I was resting." "You were finished," she said again. He stared at her for another moment, then the corner of his mouth moved in that almost smile again. "You're quite rude for someone who came to rescue me." "I came to verify your welfare." The rescue was coincidental. It didn't seem coincidental. Most things that matter don't. She looked at him directly. "And if you tell anyone I said something that profound I will deny it completely." This time it was an actual smile. Brief, real, and startlingly warm, gone almost immediately, as though he'd caught himself doing it and wasn't sure if it was allowed. She made a private decision, right there in the ministry anteroom, that she was going to see that smile so often it became ordinary. She didn't examine why she made it. The bond hummed in approval. The flight to France was on a commercial airline with a first-class cabin that Harry treated with the suppressed wonder of someone trying very hard not to look like they've never done this before. He managed it for about 40 minutes before accepting that the seat reclined and then spending 10 minutes reclining and returning it to upright just to verify this was real. Apolline pretended not to notice. Fleur pretended not to notice. It was a joint project. Over the channel, when the cabin lights had dimmed and Apolline had drifted into the light, composed sleep of someone who has learned to rest efficiently, Harry said, quietly, so as not to wake her, "What's a Veela?" "You don't know?" "I know the word. I don't know what it means." Fleur considered the diplomatic answer. Then she considered that Harry Potter had just spent 9 years in a cupboard and had probably had quite enough of people managing information for his own good. "We are a magical species," she said. "Part human, part something older. The old magic calls it Fusaker, sacred fire. It manifests as glamour, as allure. People are drawn to us, attracted, sometimes compelled if we lose control. And as fire, when we are threatened." She paused. "My mother is 3/4 Veela. I am 1/4. My grandmother was full-blooded. What happens when you're 1/4? The inheritance comes in at adolescence. Glamour, the fire reflex, stronger instincts. And sometimes," she stopped. "Sometimes what?" She looked at him. The cabin was dark and quiet, and outside the window the channel was a black sheet below the stars. This was a boy who deserved accuracy. Sometimes the older instincts activate, she said. Things that don't happen often anymore. Protections. Bonds. She watched his face. When I saw you today, in that house, something happened to my magic. Something old. He was quiet for a moment. Is that why you grabbed the door frame? Yes. What does it mean? She chose her words with the care of someone laying explosives. It means that you are important to my magic. In a specific way. I am still understanding the specifics myself. She met his eyes. I will tell you everything when I know everything. That is a promise. Harry regarded her in the careful way he had, weighing, not judging. Okay, he said. Simple as that. You are not alarmed? Should I be? Most people would want more information. You said you'd tell me when you knew. That seems fair. He leaned back against the headrest. Besides, he said, in a lower voice, my magic was glad when it happened. When yours did whatever it did. Mine went, he paused, looking for the word. Quiet. Like when you've been holding your breath for a really long time and you finally breathe. The bond moved in Fleur's chest like something turning to face the sun. She looked straight ahead at the seat back in front of her and spent a moment constructing walls against everything she was feeling, which was considerable. Try to sleep, she said. We arrive early. I don't sleep very well in new places. Try anyway. A pause. Fleur. What? Thank you. For today. She did not look at him. If she looked at him she was going to do something embarrassing, like cry in a first-class cabin over the English Channel, and she had a reputation. You are welcome, she said. Now sleep. He did, eventually. She heard his breathing even out sometime over Normandy. When she looked over, only once, briefly, he was asleep with the Fox book held loosely in one hand like a talisman, the broken-legged toy soldier tucked in his shirt pocket, his face finally, completely, entirely unguarded. She turned away and watched France come up out of the dark below them, and the bond was warm and steady and enormous in her chest, and she thought, right. So this is what happens now. The car from the airport took them through Bordeaux and out into the countryside, down roads that narrowed and greened and grew fragrant with the particular mixed smell of pine and dry grass and something floral that meant home. Harry watched through the window with his nose almost against the glass, and didn't try to play it cool. The Delacour estate wasn't a chateau, it was a long, low stone farmhouse, probably 400 years old, built into a hillside with the comfortable permanence of something that has decided to become part of the landscape. It had a garden that was beautiful in the careless way of things that are tended by people who love plants rather than people who need gardens to perform respectability. There was an orchard in the back. There were 3 cats, visible immediately, arrayed on the front steps in various attitudes of leisure. One of them opened one eye, looked at Harry, and went back to sleep. Harry stepped out of the car and stood in the early morning light, it was barely 6, the sky the pale silver blue of before sunrise, and looked at the house, and the garden, and the cats, and the hills behind with their rows of vines going silver in the light, and his face did something complicated and real and very private. Come, Apolline said, taking his hand with the natural ease of someone who has been taking children's hands her whole life. I'll show you the room. He went without resistance, still clutching his Fox book. Fleur followed. Inside, the house was stone-floored and low-ceilinged and warm in the way of places that have been heated by people living in them for generations. There were cooking smells, books, Gabrielle's toys still scattered near the hearth from the week before. It was nothing like Privet Drive. Apolline showed Harry up the narrow stairs to a small room at the end of the hall, whitewashed walls, a real bed with a deep mattress and 3 pillows, a window overlooking the orchard. There was a blue rug on the stone floor and a small bookshelf, empty and waiting. Harry stood in the middle of it. This is mine, he said. It is yours, Apolline said. He put the fox book on the shelf. Then the toy soldier on the windowsill, angled so it faced out. He sat on the edge of the bed and bounced once, experimentally, and then again, and a third time with increasing conviction. It's soft, he said, as though reporting a significant finding. Yes. The mattress at the other place was, he stopped. This is better. Good. Apolline touched his hair briefly, the lightest possible touch, and then moved to the door. Sleep as long as you need. There is no schedule today. She and Fleur went back down the stairs. In the kitchen, Apolline put the kettle on and stood at the window and looked out at the orchard, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Guardian, her mother said, finally. I know. The elders will need to be consulted. I know. This will not be a simple thing, Fleur. I am aware. Fleur sat at the kitchen table and looked at her hands. 16 years old, bond linked to a 9-year-old boy who had just bounced on a bed like it was a miracle, with the weight of ancient Veela magic sitting in her chest telling her with the authority of something very old that this was her responsibility now. Maman. Yes. He had bruises. Apolline was quiet. The one on his arm was a week old. There were others. Older. Fleur had not let herself fully process this until now, in the kitchen, with the kettle beginning to whisper. He ate 3 sandwiches and a packet of crisps in under 5 minutes. She stopped. He measured his cupboard. So he could tell people it wasn't small. The kettle began to boil. Yes, Apolline said. They are not going to simply, no. They are not. Then what? Then we will do what is necessary. Apolline turned from the window, and her face had the look it got sometimes, the one that had nothing diplomatic in it at all, the full Veela, old and clear-eyed and absolutely certain. Whatever is necessary. And then we will make sure he has time to bounce on his bed as many times as he needs to. Upstairs, through the thick stone floor, both of them could feel it, not hear it, feel it, through the bond and through Apolline's Veela blood, the slow, spreading warmth of a child's magic uncurling in a safe place for the first time. Like the smell of something that had been burning a very long time, finally given air. Chapter 2, What the Elders Said. The Veela elders arrived on a Thursday. Fleur knew they were coming 2 days before they appeared, because her mother stopped sleeping. Apolline moved through the house in the early mornings with a cup of tea going cold in her hand, pausing at windows, checking the garden wards, doing the quiet anxious inventory of a woman who is expecting company she respects and is not entirely certain she can manage. Harry noticed on the second morning. He had been at the house for 11 days. In those 11 days he had established several things about himself with the quiet efficiency of someone who has learned to adapt quickly. He woke at 5:30 regardless of when he went to bed, he was capable of sitting completely still for very long periods of time, he did not eat slowly under any circumstances, and he learned the layout of a space, every door, every window, every exit, within the first hour of entering it. He had also established that he liked the orchard, that he was deeply interested in the cats and had learned all 3 of their names and personalities in about 4 hours, and that he had opinions about chess which he was willing to defend at length. On the second morning of Apolline's sleeplessness, he came downstairs at 5:30 and found her at the kitchen window and said, without preamble, "Something's coming, isn't it?" Apolline looked at him. Harry looked back with those green eyes that were starting to feel, to Fleur, who was listening from the stairs, like a form of weather. Something you could not prepare for, only experience. Yes, Apolline said. Some people are coming to meet you. Important people. Important how? Old. Powerful. They will want to examine the bond between you and Fleur. Harry was quiet for a moment. Can they undo it? Something shifted in Apolline's face. No. But they will want to understand it. Will it hurt? The examining. It should not. Should not isn't the same as won't. No, she agreed. It isn't. She looked at him steadily. But I will be there. And Fleur will be there. And nothing will be done to you without your consent. You have my word on that. Harry processed this. Then he said, Is there bread? I'll make toast. Apolline blinked. Then she sat down at the kitchen table, and something in her shoulders came down a fraction. Top shelf. Third cupboard on the left. Fleur went back upstairs before either of them heard her. She stood in her room and looked at the ceiling and felt the bond doing its low, steady hum in her chest, content, right now, with Harry close by and awake and functional, and thought about the fact that he had immediately asked whether it could be undone. She did not examine what she felt about that answer. The elders came at dusk on Thursday, which was traditional. 3 of them. Fleur had known there would be 3. Veela elder councils always moved in 3s, a relic of the old flight formation magic that predated their integration into the wider wizarding world. They arrived in the garden between one moment and the next, the way things arrive when they do not travel through conventional space. Grandmere Celeste came first. She was Apolline's grandmother, which made her Fleur's great-grandmother, and she was the oldest living Veela in France and possibly in Europe. She looked about 65 and was somewhere north of 140. She was small and white-haired and had the economy of movement of someone who has not wasted a gesture in decades. Behind her, Isabeau Vauquelin, the council speaker, tall and silver-braided and carrying a staff that was not for walking but for channeling. And third, Mireille Fontaine, the eldest second, who had known Fleur since birth and whose approval Fleur had spent her entire adolescence quietly desperate for and would never admit to. Apolline met them in the garden. There were formal greetings in the old dialect that Fleur had only passable fluency in, the specific ritual language of the Veela clans that didn't translate neatly into modern French. Fleur stood at her mother's shoulder and did the things expected of her. Harry stood beside Fleur. The 3 elders looked at him. He looked back. Grandmere Celeste made a sound that wasn't quite a word. She stepped forward, bypassing Apolline, bypassing Fleur, and crouched down in front of Harry with a directness that should have been alarming and somehow wasn't. She was very still. She looked at him the way a person looks at something they are trying to read in bad light. Harry waited. "Attends les mains," she said. "Hold out your hands." He glanced at Fleur. She gave him the faintest nod. He held out his hands, palms up. Grandmere Celeste placed 2 fingers on his wrist, lightly, barely a touch, and closed her eyes. For a moment the garden was completely silent. The early evening insects had stopped. The 3 cats, who had been watching from the orchard fence, sat up straight. Then the old woman stood, and turned, and said something in the old dialect to the other 2 elders, and both of them went very still. "What did she say?" Harry asked, quietly. "She said your magic is very old," Fleur translated, equally quiet. "And very large." "Oh." He looked at his hands, then back up. "Is that bad?" "It is," Fleur searched for the accurate word. "Significant." The examination that followed took 2 hours and happened inside, in the large stone-flagged sitting room with every lamp lit and the fire burning despite the warmth of the evening. It was not painful. It was, however, thorough. Isabeau drew what looked like a map in the air between Harry and Fleur, golden lines of light that showed the bond structure, and all 3 elders moved around it in a slow circle, talking to each other in their dialect, consulting a small book that Mireille had produced from somewhere. Harry sat in the armchair nearest the fire and endured it with patience that Fleur suspected was not entirely natural. She could feel at the edge of the bond a certain low-level restlessness, the way you feel under a prolonged and careful stare. But he held himself still. He watched everything. He asked one question: why does it look like that? About a particular knot in the bond's mapping that the elders kept returning to, and when Grandmere Celeste answered him in her dialect, he listened with full attention even though he couldn't understand a word. After, the elders sat. Apolline sat. Fleur sat beside Harry on the hearthrug because the chairs were occupied and he had, with no apparent self-consciousness, simply sat on the floor when he ran out of seating options. Grandmère Celeste spoke in French now, for the benefit of Harry. "The bond between you is guardian," she said. Her voice was dry and precise, a voice that had given rulings for 70 years. "You are aware of what this means?" Fleur explained it, Harry said. "What did she tell you?" "That it's protective. Old. And permanent. Essentially correct." The old woman looked at him steadily. "The last guardian bond recorded in our histories occurred in 1743. Before that, in 1612. They are not common. They are not predictable. And they do not occur between just any two individuals." She paused. "They require two conditions. First, a Veela of sufficient blood purity. Fleur's quarter inheritance is, unusually, sufficient, which tells us something about the particular quality of her magic." Fleur felt Mireille glance at her and kept her expression neutral. "Second, a soul with a specific magical signature. Old magic. Marked magic." She looked at Harry's forehead, the scar there, barely visible under his falling hair. "Magic that has been touched by death and survived." Harry said nothing. His face had gone carefully still, not blank, but closed in the precise way of someone who has learned to process things privately. "The guardian bond is not merely protective," Celeste continued. "It is symbiotic. Fleur's fire will recognize Harry as hers and respond to threats against him. Harry's magic will recognize Fleur's and attune to it, deepen, grow more stable in its presence." She folded her hands in her lap. "The bond will evolve over time. Particularly as both parties age." The slightest pause. "This will require management." "Management meaning what, exactly?" Fleur asked. "Distance will cause discomfort for both of you. Not immediately, but within weeks. The bond needs proximity to function as intended." Isabeau spoke now, her voice less dry, more careful. "Beyond 50 or 60 miles, you will begin to feel a pulling. An incompleteness. It will not be debilitating in the short term, but it will grow." Harry was looking at the golden map, which was still faintly visible in the air between them, slowly fading. "So we have to stay near each other?" "Within reason. Same country, ideally. The bond will accommodate some distance as it matures and the two of you adapt to each other." Isabeau hesitated, which was notable because she was not a woman who hesitated. "The bond will also communicate. Between you. Not words. More like impressions. Moods. Physical urgency when either of you is in danger." "I noticed that," Harry said. Everyone looked at him. "On the plane," he said, simply. "When Fleur grabbed the door frame. I felt something happen first. Before she reacted." He looked at Fleur. "I thought I was imagining it." Fleur had not known that. She had not known that he had felt the bond's activation before she had. The implications of that were significant enough that she kept her face very neutral while she worked through them. "The bond is not one-directional," Grandmère Celeste said, and there was something new in her voice now. "Interest. Real interest, the kind an academic has when a hypothesis is confirmed. The child is not simply the protected party. He is," she spoke in her dialect for a moment, consulting Mireille. "Co-anchor," Mireille supplied, in French. "Both of you anchor it," Celeste said. "This is unusual. In the 1743 bond, the Veela was the sole active party, the human was passive. Protected, but passive." She looked between them. "This is different. This boy's magic is not passive." "He's 9, Fleur said, before she could stop herself. "He is 9, the old woman agreed. "And his magic is not passive." She looked at Harry. Whatever you were before that scar, boy, whatever you were to become, the curse changed the architecture of your power. It didn't diminish it. It deepened it. You are carrying something large. She paused. You will need to learn to carry it properly. Harry looked at his hands again. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in a voice that was very even, "Will you teach me?" Celeste blinked. It was the first time Fleur had seen her great-grandmother look surprised possibly ever. "I am 143 years old," the old woman said. "I do not take students." "All right," Harry said, without argument. "Who should I ask then?" The silence that followed was, Fleur recognized, the silence of three extremely old and powerful women recalibrating their assessment of a 9-year-old boy. "We will arrange instruction," Apolline said, stepping into the gap with the smooth efficiency of someone who has navigated Veela politics for 30 years. "Through the council, if the council is willing." Isabeau and Mireille exchanged a glance. "The council is willing," Isabeau said, carefully. After the elders left, the same way they arrived, between one moment and the next, the garden empty where they'd stood, Apolline made dinner with the focused calm of a woman who processes difficult conversations through cooking. Harry set the table without being asked, having apparently learned the cabinet locations well enough to do it correctly. He put the forks on the wrong side, realized, switched them, and said nothing about it. Fleur sat at the table and watched him and said, "You asked Grandmère Celeste to teach you. She's the most powerful one. You should always learn from the best. She is 143 years old and has never taken a student." She could have said no. She didn't really say no. He sat across from her. She said she doesn't take students, which is different. That's a habit, not a rule. Fleur stared at him. "What?" he said. "You are 9. "Yes, you keep saying that. I'm aware." He picked up his fork. "Does it bother you? That I'm 9? She stopped. "You are 9 now. The bond will," she glanced at her mother, who was very pointedly focused on the stove. "It will change as you grow. It will become different," Harry said. "Yes. But not go away." "No." He nodded, accepting this. "Then, the part where it makes your magic respond to threats against me, does that happen now? Or later?" "Now. It has already, at the house, you wanted to set something on fire." She looked at him sharply. He was eating and watching her with those green eyes and the almost smile. "The bond," she said. "You could feel that?" "It was pretty strongly communicated." He speared a piece of chicken. "So if something threatened me, what would you do?" "Fleur," Apolline said, from the stove, "is perhaps not a conversation for dinner." "I just want to know," Harry said, with the genuine practicality of someone gathering operational information rather than trying to provoke anyone. "If something happens, I want to know what to expect." There was something so completely reasonable about it that Fleur answered honestly. "I would burn it," she said. "Whatever it was. I would burn it and I would not particularly think about it first." Harry nodded. "Good," he said, and went back to his dinner. The council arranged a tutor within the week. His name was Professor Arsenault, and he arrived on a bicycle that he chain-locked to the garden gate with the specific care of a man who has had bicycles stolen before, which Fleur found both bizarre and charming. He was perhaps 50, slight, with quick eyes and ink stains on his first 2 fingers, and he had the energy of someone who finds things genuinely interesting and is delighted to tell you why. He taught core magical theory, early wandless technique, and the history of pre-Hogwarts magical education in France, which was arguably the best in the world for foundational skills and which Hogwarts resolutely declined to acknowledge. He arrived 3 mornings a week and stayed for 4 hours. Harry's first lesson lasted 6 hours because neither of them noticed when the 4-hour mark passed. Fleur sat in the garden with her own revision and watched through the window as Arsenault drew diagrams in the air with his wand, and Harry leaned forward with his elbows on the table and the concentrated expression of someone who has been starving for this and didn't have words for the hunger until now. By the third session Harry was asking questions that Arsenault had to visibly prepare for, and by the second week the professor had written to the council asking for additional materials at a level 3 years above where they'd started. The wandless work was something else. Most children couldn't do reliable wandless magic until they were 12 or 13, and even then it was rudimentary, accidental magic, emotional responses, the kind of thing that happened to them. Deliberate wandless technique required a level of magical awareness and fine control that typically needed a wand to establish first. Harry was 10 days into lessons when he levitated a book without being asked to. Not dramatically. He was reading and needed the other book from across the table, and his hand went out and the book slid to him, smooth as if on glass. He didn't notice for a moment. Arsenault went very still. Then Harry noticed the silence and looked at the book in his hand and said, "Sorry." Force of habit. That is a force of habit? Arsenault said, in a voice that was doing its best to be casual. Things move when I need them. They always have. He put the book down. Is that not normal? At your control and precision? No. That is not normal. The professor looked at Harry with a new quality of attention. Has this always happened, or, as long as I can remember? He paused. At the Dursleys I tried not to let them see. It upset them. Arsenault wrote another letter to the council that afternoon. Fleur read it over his shoulder because she had no intention of being managed out of information about things that concerned Harry, and the letter described what he'd seen in language that even through academic understatement was clearly excited. Unconscious precision wandless levitation. Possible direct magical conduit, no wand intermediary at this power level is documented in children under 12. Recommend observation. Recommend specialist consultation. Recommend. He'd been suppressing it, Fleur said. At the Dursleys. For years he had been making himself smaller and quieter and suppressing his magic because they punished him for it. She folded her arms. And it was still doing that. Even suppressed. Imagine what it does when it's not. Arsenault looked at her over his notes. You have thought about this considerably. I think about it constantly, she said, and went back to the garden. The summer had its rhythms. Arsenault 3 mornings a week. Apolline's work, mostly conducted by Owl and occasional Fleur, with trips to Paris that she tried to keep to 1 night at most. Gabrielle arrived for the last 3 weeks of August. She was 6, blonde, and immediately and completely obsessed with Harry in the frank way small children adopt certain people as permanent fixtures in their personal universe. She called him Harry because the H was still trouble for her, and she followed him through the orchard and demanded stories and opinions and once made him sit for 40 minutes while she braided grass into his hair with complete seriousness, and he submitted to all of this with a tolerance that told Fleur something important about him. He had no idea how to receive affection, but he recognized it as not threatening, and he would allow it, carefully, in small amounts, like letting something approach that he wasn't sure yet wouldn't bolt. Fleur gave him space and proximity in rough alternation, learning the rhythm of what the bond communicated when she was too close and too absent respectively. She was doing her own revision, her 5th year at Beauxbatons was approaching, with its attendant examinations, and Harry understood without being told that her work was her work, and he didn't interrupt it. He'd appear in her peripheral vision, settle nearby with his own book or his lessons, and they'd work in parallel for hours at a stretch in the specific comfortable quiet of people who can occupy the same space without performing anything for each other. She learned things about him through proximity. He talked to the cats. Not baby talk but actual conversations, reporting the day's events, asking opinions, relaying the verdicts. He had a system for organizing information, physical, tactile. He made notes in a small notebook he'd got from Arsenault and organized them by connection rather than subject. He could not draw to save his life, but he kept trying, determined sketches of things that interested him that looked like they'd been produced by someone with their non-dominant hand while thinking about something else. He had a laugh that he appeared to be rationing. She heard it rarely enough that when she did it felt significant. And his magic grew. Every week, something new. Every week, Arsenault quietly revised his expectations upward. The wandless work refined itself. He had precision at 10 paces by the second month. He began to understand magical theory not as rules but as grammar, the way you understand a language when you find the logic inside it, and once he had the logic he pushed at the edges of it with consistent, methodical curiosity that Arsenault said reminded him of the great theorists and which Fleur suspected was simply Harry being Harry, a person for whom the ceiling was always a question rather than a limit. One afternoon at the end of August, 3 weeks before she was due to return to Beauxbatons, Fleur was in the orchard reading when the quality of the air changed. It was not subtle, a sharp drop in temperature, a pressure in the atmosphere, the particular feeling that precedes the kind of thunderstorm that means it. She looked up. Harry was at the far end of the orchard, maybe 40 feet away, sitting cross-legged on the grass with his eyes closed. His hands were loose on his knees. He was perfectly still. Around him, the grass was moving. Not in wind, the air was windless. It moved in slow concentric rings outward from where he sat, as though something large was breathing beneath the surface. The light around him was slightly different. Brighter, possibly. Or denser. She stood up. The light stabilized and brightened, and then, for 3, 4, 5 seconds, it bloomed. Not an explosion. Not a dramatic visual event. A bloom, like a flower opening in fast forward, a silent radial pulse of white gold light that moved through the orchard and made the leaves turn silver and made Fleur's Veela blood sing like a string being plucked, and then it was gone, and Harry opened his eyes, and he looked at her across the grass. He didn't look surprised. He looked tired, and pleased, and slightly shaky, the way you look when you've just done something genuinely difficult. "I've been trying to do that for a week," he said. She walked over and sat down across from him. "What was that?" "Arsenault calls it core emission. Where you push your magic outward intentionally instead of letting it bleed." He flexed his fingers. "It's hard to make it even. It keeps wanting to spike on one side." "How much of your magic was that?" He thought about it. "About a third. Maybe a bit more." She looked at the orchard around them. The silver light was gone from the leaves, but the cats, all 3 had appeared and were sitting in a ring about 10 feet out, watching Harry with an attention unusual even for cats. "A third," she said. "Yeah. You are 9 years old." I keep saying that because it keeps being relevant," she said. "Arsenault's theoretical framework does not have a category for this, Harry." He looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes, not pride, not quite. Something more complicated. The awareness, perhaps, of a person who has spent years being told they were nothing, discovering that the reverse might be significantly true, and not knowing entirely what to do with the distance between those two things. "Is it frightening?" he asked. "To you?" She held his gaze. "No. Not at all. She found the honest word. "It's like standing next to something large that is on your side. Not frightening. Just," she paused. "Large." He nodded. Then, carefully, like someone doing a calculation, "Does the bond make it larger?" "My magic. Does your Veela inheritance amplify it somehow?" "I don't know. The elders said it attunes. Deepens. Whether that means amplifies or simply stabilizes, if it does," he said, "that works the other way too. You said the bond feeds both directions." She had thought about this. She had been trying not to think about this because thinking about it led her to places that were several years premature and she was not going to. "Yes," she said. "Theoretically. So when my magic is," he gestured at the grass rings that were still very faintly visible. "When it does that." You feel that too? Yes. He absorbed this. Then, sorry. She blinked. What? For, he waved generally. For all of it. The bond, the magic, he looked at her directly. You didn't choose this. I know you didn't choose it. The silence sat between them in the warm late August orchard. Neither did you, she said. No. But it's more complicated for you. He stopped. I don't mind it. The bond. I noticed that might be strange to say. But I don't. She looked at the orchard, the rows of apple trees that needed another month before they'd fruit, the particular gold of the light in the late afternoon. The bond was doing something warm and resonant in her chest, and she was going to have to speak carefully here. She knew, he was 9 years old and she was 16, and in several years some of what the elders had said about the bond's evolution was going to become relevant, and she was not going to be the person who didn't manage that responsibly. But she was also not going to lie to him. I don't mind it either, she said. Now. She met his eyes. It will become more complicated. For both of us. As you grow. I know. Do you? The elders said the bond evolves. Mireille said, I don't have all the dialect, but I got enough of it. His voice was steady. I know what it might become. And? He was quiet for a moment. Then, I think the best thing is to be honest about it when it happens, rather than pretending it isn't. He shrugged. That's how I think about most things. She studied him for a moment, this boy who was too small for his age and too old for it simultaneously, who had just emitted a bloom of raw magical power 1/3 the size of his full capacity without a wand at 9 years old, who had logic like a scalpel and had just given her more emotional intelligence than most adults managed. Yes, she said. That is the best thing. He nodded, apparently satisfied, and lay back on the grass and looked up at the apple trees. I don't want to go to Hogwarts, he said, conversationally. She blinked at the change of subject. What? I'll have to, eventually. Dumbledore will arrange it. I expect he'll show up at some point. He sounded remarkably unbothered. He put me with the Dursleys, you know. I worked that out. The blood ward, Apolline said it had to be a blood relative, and someone had to decide that. Had to be someone powerful in the British wizarding world who knew where Voldemort had put his curse. He paused. It had to be Dumbledore. The orchard was very quiet. Maman has been not saying that for 2 months, Fleur said. I know. She keeps almost saying it and then deciding I should be settled before she tells me. He was looking at the sky through the apple boughs. I'd rather just know things. Harry, I'm not angry. Not, right now. I might be later. He said it the way you might note that it's likely to rain. But it's more useful to just know the shape of things. She thought about the 9-year-old in the cupboard who had measured it so he could tell people it wasn't small. Who had been building a map of his own situation in the dark for years, because that was what you did when you had nothing else. Dumbledore will come, she agreed. Probably before September. What will Apolline do? Whatever is necessary, she said, echoing her mother's words from the first night, and she will be very pleasant about it. The almost smile. I like your mother. She is terrifying. Yeah, he said. That's why I like her. 4 days later, at 9:15 in the morning, Apolline opened the front door to find Albus Dumbledore on the garden path, silver-bearded, half-moon spectacles, an expression of grandfatherly warmth that was immaculately assembled. He said, Good morning, Apolline. I wonder if I might speak with young Harry? Apolline said, Good morning, Albus. Come in. I'll make tea. Harry was in the kitchen doing his morning revision. He looked up when Dumbledore came through the door and regarded him with a calm, frank attention that made Dumbledore, visibly, slightly adjust his expectations. Harry, Dumbledore said, with a warmth that was genuine, this was the complicated thing about him, the warmth was never entirely performed. My name is Albus Dumbledore. I've been looking forward to meeting you. I know who you are, Harry said. He did not stand up. He did not change his expression. He simply looked at Dumbledore with those green eyes and waited. Apolline set the tea things down and sat at the table. Fleur came in from the hallway and leaned against the counter. Dumbledore sat down. He looked at Harry with an expression that was recalibrating, slightly, behind the warmth. You seem well, he said. I'm better than I was, Harry said. Which isn't a very high bar. A small silence. Yes, Dumbledore said. I want to talk to you about that. And about what comes next for your education. About Hogwarts. I'll go to Hogwarts, Harry said. Dumbledore paused. He had been prepared, Fleur could see, for resistance. For persuasion to be required. Oh, he said. I'll go because I want to learn everything the British magical world can teach me, and Hogwarts has access I can't get otherwise. Harry picked up his quill. But I want to be clear about something first. Certainly. You put me with the Dursleys. The kitchen was very quiet. Apolline had her hands folded on the table. Fleur watched Dumbledore's face. He did not deny it. He held Harry's gaze and said, I did. It was necessary, Harry said. For the Blood Ward. I know. It makes sense strategically. What doesn't make sense is that nobody checked. Nobody came. For 8 years. He said it without heat, which was somehow worse than anger. The ward requires me to call it home. It stopped working before I was 5, I think. So whatever protection you thought you were providing, he shrugged. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in the blue eyes, something that was not entirely comfortable and which Fleur decided to hold on to, because it was real. You are right, Dumbledore said. I am sorry, Harry. I know. Harry opened his textbook. I'll think about whether that's enough. But for now, what I want is to be at Hogwarts on my own terms. Not yours. Not the school's. Mine. I think, Dumbledore said carefully, that can be arranged. Good. Harry looked up again, and his eyes were entirely clear. Then I look forward to it, Professor. More tea. Fleur pressed her lips together against the thing that wanted to be a grin and looked at the ceiling. The bond hummed warm and certain in her chest, and she thought about what Grandmere Celeste had said, you are carrying something large, and thought that large was very possibly an understatement. Outside, the apple trees swayed in a wind that had nothing to do with the weather. Chapter 3, Diagon Alley does not know what to do with this. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Harry had been expecting it, he'd known, in the abstract, that it was coming, but there was still something about holding the thick cream envelope with Mr. H. Potter, the Delacour residence, Bordeaux, France, written in emerald ink that made his hands do something slight and involuntary. Not a tremor. More like a recognition. Like a key turning. He put it on the table and looked at it for a moment. Then he opened it, read it thoroughly from start to finish without skipping anything, folded it back into the envelope, and said to Fleur, who was watching him from across the breakfast table with the specific quality of attention she deployed when she was pretending not to watch him, the supply list is quite long. Yes. We'll need Diagon Alley. Yes. When can we go? She picked up her own coffee. Maman has a council meeting on Thursday. Friday we could go. She paused. There are other things to attend to in London. Gringotts. My parents' vault. Your vault. There are, Harry, there are accounts in your name that have not been touched since your parents died. The goblins have been administering them under a guardian clause that defaulted to Dumbledore. She said it steadily, giving him the information straight because that was what he'd asked for and what she'd promised. We believe he has not interfered with the principal. But the accounts need to be placed under your own authority, or at least under someone other than the Hogwarts headmaster. Harry looked at his letter. Can they be placed under Apolline's authority? She would need your formal assignment of proxy. As a minor you cannot hold independent Gringotts management rights, but you can designate a proxy outside of Britain's standard Guardian framework. It would require, there are French-British banking treaty instruments. She stopped. I am explaining things you don't need yet. I followed most of it. I know you did. That's the problem. She set her coffee down. You have 11 years of financial activity in your name that you have never seen. Interest accumulations, potential trust instruments, the Potter estate, how large is it? She looked at him. The estate, he said. Roughly. Roughly, she said, carefully, is a word that applies with difficulty to the Potter family holdings. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, all right. Friday. Friday morning came in fast and clear, the kind of late September day that looks like summer trying to remember itself. Apolline wore what Fleur privately thought of as her battle clothes, elegant, precise, the kind of outfit that communicated competence before she opened her mouth. She had 3 scrolls of legal parchment in her bag and the expression of someone who was looking forward to a productive morning. Harry wore his school clothes, which fit him now. Apolline had taken him to the village and bought him actual clothes that were his size, and he still had moments of looking down at a sleeve that stopped at his wrist rather than his knuckles with an expression of vague surprise. His hair remained fundamentally untamable. His glasses had been repaired by a proper spell and no longer had tape on them. He looked, Fleur thought, like someone in the process of becoming something, the way a photograph looks when it's still developing. They took the Fleur from the house to the leaky cauldron. Harry had done it once before. Apolline had included a basic Fleur transit lesson in the 3rd week at the house, on the principle that a child who didn't know how to move through the wizarding world's transport infrastructure was a child who could not remove himself from danger independently. He'd got it in 2 attempts, which Fleur had managed in 7 and preferred not to discuss. He came through the leaky cauldron's fireplace, patted ash off his jacket, and looked around. The pub was dim and low-ceilinged and full of the particular ambient noise of a London pub that happens also to be a magical gateway, conversations, the clink of glasses, a witch in the corner arguing quietly with a scroll. Several people glanced at them as they came through. Several people's glances snagged on Harry and did not immediately move on, and Fleur noticed the precise moment Harry noticed this and adjusted, a slight shift in posture, a settling, the way a person settles when they recognize terrain that requires navigation. He didn't look down. He looked straight ahead. Stay close, Apolline said, not to Harry. Harry knew to stay close, but to Fleur, who had a tendency to drift toward confrontation in crowded spaces. Tom the barkeeper did a visible double take. He was not alone. As Apolline led them through the pub toward the back entrance to Diagon Alley, Fleur counted 3 people who stopped mid-sentence, 2 who physically turned to look, and 1 elderly witch who stood up from her stool with a hand pressed to her chest as though the sight of Harry Potter in the leaky cauldron required a seated person to become a standing one. People are staring, Harry said, at normal conversational volume. Yes. Is that going to happen everywhere? Yes. He processed this. Right. The archway to Diagon Alley opened at Apolline's touch and they stepped through into the noise and press of the wizarding shopping district on a busy Friday morning, and the staring became immediately and significantly worse. Diagon Alley in late September was full of Hogwarts families doing last-minute supply runs, students Harry's age with parents in tow, older students navigating independently, the particular controlled chaos of a place that serves both mundane shopping needs and deeply unusual ones simultaneously. There was a display of self-stirring cauldrons in the window of a shop to their left. A cage of something that might have been owls but wasn't quite wobbled in the breeze outside a creature shop. A witch at a potion ingredient stall was explaining the difference between 2 varieties of beetle wing with the weary patience of someone who has made this explanation many times today. And threading through all of it, immediate and spreading like weather, the recognition. Heads turning. Whispers starting. A boy of about 12 stopped dead and grabbed his mother's sleeve. An older girl went pink and made a sound that she then immediately suppressed. Harry walked through it without breaking stride, without looking at anyone, without varying his pace. His face was neutral and his chin was level, and the only tell was a very faint tension in his jaw that Fleur could read because she'd spent 3 months learning to read him. She fell into step beside him, not in front, not behind. Even. They expected someone smaller, she said, quietly. I am small, he said. You are not. Not anymore. He'd grown 2 inches since July. Arsenault's theory was that the magic had been doing something metabolic that improved. Now it was no longer suppressed, his appetite had become enormous and he'd filled out in the steady quiet way of something that had simply been waiting for the conditions to change. They expected someone who looks like what they've been told. A child in a story. I'm not a child in a story. No, she said. You are not. She met the gaze of a woman staring from a doorway and held it until the woman looked away. Shall we start with Gringotts? Gringotts was at the far end of the alley, white and grand and faintly contemptuous of everything around it in the way of very old financial institutions. The goblin at the door did not look at Harry's scar. The goblins never did. They had their own opinions about the Wizarding War and about the boy who lived, and they kept those opinions entirely to themselves behind faces of professional indifference. What the door goblin did do was look at Harry with a precise, assessment-quality attention, and then step aside more promptly than Fleur had seen him step aside for anyone. Inside, Apolline went to the counter with her scrolls of treaty parchment, and a goblin who introduced himself as Ragnarok led Harry, Apolline, and Fleur to a private meeting room off the main hall. The meeting room was stone-floored and torch-lit and contained a table, 4 chairs, and the particular dense silence of a room where significant quantities of money had been discussed over many years. Ragnarok settled behind the table with a ledger and looked at Harry. Mr. Potter, he said. The Potter accounts have been under administrative management since November 1, 1981. We are pleased to conduct a formal accounting review. He opened the ledger to a marked page. Are you prepared to proceed? Yes, Harry said. He sat forward with his elbows on the table, which was not the posture Apolline had coached and which Fleur suspected he did anyway because he was Harry. What am I looking at? Ragnarok's expression did not change, but there was something in it, a very faint upward adjustment, like a professional encountering a client who does not waste time. He turned the ledger to face Harry. Harry looked at the numbers. He was still for a moment. Then, carefully, he looked at Fleur. She kept her expression neutral. She'd seen the estimates Apolline had run. She had some idea. This is in galleons, Harry said. Correct. And the conversion to, at current rates, approximately 47 million British pounds sterling for the liquid holdings alone. The estate properties and legacy trusts are assessed separately. Ragnarok turned a page. The Potter family maintained significant pre-war investments. Your father's family built its holdings over 6 generations. Several of those investment portfolios have continued to accumulate under Gringotts' management in your absence. He paused. The Gringotts administrative fee for the period is noted on page 4. Harry turned to page 4, looked at the fee, and said, mildly, that's quite a fee. It reflects 47 months of active portfolio management at the standard administrative rate. Is there a standard rate for accounts where the client is a 1-year-old who doesn't know the account exists? The silence in the room was extremely precise. Apolline pressed her lips together. Fleur looked at the wall. Ragnarok regarded Harry for a moment. There is a standard rate, he said. There is also, at Gringotts' discretion, a goodwill adjustment available in exceptional circumstances. I think this qualifies as exceptional circumstances, Harry said pleasantly. What would you consider reasonable? 20 minutes later they left the meeting room with an adjusted fee, a formal account review document, Apolline designated as acting proxy manager with full authority until Harry reached majority, and a key to the Potter family vault which Ragnarok had transferred to Harry's hand with something that looked, for a goblin, almost like approval. In the corridor outside, Apolline looked at her daughter. "Don't say anything," Fleur said. "I wasn't going to say anything. You have the face." "I have no face." Harry emerged from the meeting room behind them. "We should do the vault." The vault cart descended through Gringotts tunnels with the stomach-dropping speed that Fleur had experienced twice before and still found privately exhilarating. Harry gripped the side of the cart and said nothing until they leveled out into the deeper vaults, and then said, into the rushing dark air, "Does it always go this fast?" "Yes," said the cart goblin, with the satisfaction of someone proud of their infrastructure. "Good," Harry said. The Potter vault was not the largest vault in Gringotts. There were older families, darker piles of accumulated wealth below, but it was considerable. Gold, certainly, and silver, in quantities that would take time to process emotionally. But it was the other things that made Harry go still inside the vault door. Books. Dozens of them, stacked on a stone shelf that ran the length of one wall, not organized, just gathered, the library of two people who read constantly and kept things and probably planned to organize them later and then didn't get later. A cloak, folded in silver silk. Harry picked it up carefully, felt the fabric, and Fleur recognized the quality of the magic in it from 3 feet away, old and rare and unmistakable. Several boxes of papers. A photograph in a silver frame, face down. Harry turned the photograph over. A woman and a man. The woman had red hair and green eyes, his green, exactly his, and was laughing at something off-frame. The man had dark, wild hair that owed Harry an apology, and glasses, and was looking at the woman with an expression that was entirely unguarded. Harry looked at the photograph for a long time. Nobody said anything. Fleur stood near the vault door and looked at the wall and let him have it. He put the photograph carefully inside his jacket. He took the cloak. He took 2 of the books off the shelf, examined their titles, put one back, kept one. He did not take the gold. Apolline would arrange transfers. He treated the vault with the respect of someone visiting a place that is not theirs yet, or is theirs in a way that still needs time. When he came out, his face was composed and his eyes were bright and he was clearly not going to talk about it, which Fleur respected absolutely. "Right," he said. "School supplies." Madame Malkin's was their first stop, because robes were the most logistically involved item. The shop was busy, it being a school supply Friday, and they waited 12 minutes before a fitting space opened up, during which Harry read 3 pages of the book he'd taken from the vault, Advanced Magical Theory, 3rd edition, James Potter's name inside the cover in confident 19-year-old handwriting, and did not look at the other families moving around the shop. 2 boys came in while they waited. Fleur noticed them because one of them was talking loudly enough to be noticeable and the other one was the kind of blonde that looked expensive and deliberate. They were Harry's age, roughly, first years, and moving through the shop with the ease of people accustomed to it. The blonde one saw Harry, clocked the scar with the specific speed of someone who has been told to watch for it, and navigated directly over. "You're Harry Potter," he said. Harry looked up from his book. "Yes. Draco Malfoy." He said it like a card being placed on a table, a good card, by his estimation. He glanced at Fleur and Apolline with the confident assessment of a boy who has learned value from his parents. "You're French." "Well spotted," Fleur said. "I'm at Hogwarts too," Draco said, to Harry, smoothly redirecting. "First year, same as you. You'll want to know the right people before you get there. There are families that matter and families that," he made a gesture that was meant to communicate the rest. Harry looked at him with an attention that Fleur recognized as the particular attention he gave to things he was cataloging rather than engaging with. "Which families matter?" he asked. Draco, who had expected either deference or confrontation and got neither, adjusted slightly. "Old families. Pure-blood families. The Malfoys, the Knotts, the Parkinsons, the Potters are an old family," Harry said. Well, yes, and Fleur's family is one of the oldest magical bloodlines in France. He looked at Draco with complete equanimity. So I think I'm probably talking to the right people. Draco blinked. His companion, Fleur thought she'd seen the face before, a crab, possibly, looked confused in the way people look confused when a conversation has departed from its expected track. I just meant, I know what you meant, Harry said. I appreciate the thought. He said it with such complete, unfussed sincerity that Draco couldn't find a foothold in it for offense. Who are you going and expecting to be sorted to? The conversation that followed was, genuinely a conversation, Fleur observed with some fascination. Harry asked questions and listened to the answers and offered nothing political and gave nothing away, and by the end of it Draco had gone from performing status to actually talking, and had mentioned twice that he hoped Harry would be in Slytherin, and had left when his mother appeared looking marginally confused about what had just happened. Harry went back to his book. You neutralized him, Fleur said. I was interested in him, Harry said. He's been taught to think a specific way. It's not his fault yet. It might be later. He turned a page. Slytherin ambition without the cruelty would be quite useful, actually. She stared at him. What? He said, not looking up. Nothing, she said. Nothing at all. The fitting was quick once a space opened. Harry stood on the small platform and the measuring tape did its work and he held very still in the manner of someone who finds being fussed over mildly uncomfortable but sees no advantage in making it worse. Madame Malkin herself was efficient and professional and the only indication she recognized him was a very brief softening around her eyes when she marked the first robe. They moved through the rest of the list in a focused sweep. Flourish and blots took the longest because Harry moved through it like someone who had been ration restricted and was suddenly at a feast, not grabbing, but moving slowly down the shelves with the measuring attention of someone building a map. He bought everything on the list and 7 things not on it, including a book on magical theory by an author Arsenault had mentioned once in passing and a slim volume on the history of Veela magic that he pulled from a lower shelf and added to his pile without comment. Fleur looked at the Veela history book and said nothing. He looked at her looking at it and said, also nothing. The wand was last. Ollivanders had the particular quality of quiet that exists in rooms where something important happens regularly. The bell above the door chimed their arrival. Nobody appeared immediately. The boxes stacked floor to ceiling had that quality of waiting about them, as though each one was paying close attention. Mr. Ollivander materialized from between shelves with the particular sudden quality that Fleur had always found slightly alarming, his pale eyes going directly to Harry. Mr. Potter, he said. He did not seem surprised. He had the manner of someone who has been expecting this appointment for a specific number of years and is pleased to have arrived at it. I wondered when we'd see you. His gaze went briefly to Fleur. And you've brought, He paused. I can feel the bond from here. Interesting. Harry needs a wand, Apolline said pleasantly. Yes. He does. Ollivander was already moving, pulling boxes with the quick surety of someone following an internal logic. I remember every wand I've ever sold, Mr. Potter. I sold your father a wand, mahogany, 11 inches, pliable. Your mother, willow, 10 1/4, swishy. Excellent for charms. He paused, box in hand, and looked at Harry. And I sold a wand to the one who gave you that scar. You, 13 1/2 inches. Curious that you should come to me now. Why curious? Harry asked. Because your mother's wand's brother is the one that cursed you. The phoenix that gave a feather for that wand. He set the first box down and opened it. Gave only one other feather. Ever. He placed a wand in Harry's hand. Try that. Holly, 11 inches. Harry picked it up. The warmth was immediate, not from the wand, Fleur realized, but from the bond, which surged in her chest with a resonance that was entirely different from its usual hum. Like a tuning fork finding its note. She put a hand against the doorframe because the last time she'd done that Harry had noticed and she was not going to. Harry raised the wand and the light in the shop changed. Not dramatically. But the quality of it shifted, the particular warm gold of something that has found correct alignment, and several of the boxes on the nearby shelves rattled faintly. Ollivander was very still. "Holly and phoenix feather," he said. 11 inches. Nice and supple. He looked at Harry. "That wand chose you very quickly, Mr. Potter." "I could feel it waiting," Harry said. He turned the wand and watched how the light moved along it. "What does it mean?" "That the brother wand, it means you and Voldemort are connected in a way that goes beyond the curse," Ollivander said, and the name landed in the shop with its usual atmospheric effect. Apolline didn't react, Fleur felt a coldness that was not temperature, and Harry looked at the wand maker and did not flinch. Connected wands cannot fight each other in the usual way. If you meet him, when you meet him, your cores will recognize each other. Strange things may happen. What kind of strange things? Priori incantatem, Ollivander said. The echo of spells. And other things less documented. He looked at Harry with those pale eyes that seemed to see through quite a lot. "You will not be frightened of him." "No," Harry said. It wasn't bravado. It was simply accurate, delivered in the same tone you'd confirm a fact about the weather. Ollivander looked at him for a long moment, and there was something in the old man's expression that Fleur interpreted as relief. "Good," Ollivander said. 7 galleons. Outside, the alley was still busy, the mid-morning press of shoppers moving in both directions, the noise and smell of the place, roasting nuts from a cart, potion ingredients, fresh parchment. Harry held his wand box under one arm and walked beside Fleur with the slightly different posture of someone who has just acquired something important. "Priori incantatem," he said. "I know what it is," Fleur said. "I won't pretend otherwise. Connected cores. If we meet, when we meet." He said when. Ollivander is old and perceptive and likely correct. Harry nodded, turning this over. "The Horcrux theory," he said. Fleur stopped walking. He stopped too, and looked at her. "Arsenault mentioned it as a theoretical framework," he said, very carefully, measuring her reaction. "Soul-splitting dark magic. The mechanism by which a witch or wizard attempts to tether themselves to life. The Flamel Institute records mentioned Voldemort was studying it before the war." He paused. "And if a curse strong enough to kill an adult rebounded off a 1-year-old, there has to be a reason. Magic like that doesn't just dissolve. It goes somewhere. Harry, I'm not being morbid. I'm being accurate." He looked at her steadily. "I think a piece of him is in me. I think that's what the elders meant when they said my magic has been touched by death. I think that's what makes the wand cores resonate. And I think," he paused. "I think the guardian bond might be reacting to it. Not to me. To both of us." The alley moved around them, shoppers parting and flowing, entirely unaware. Fleur looked at Harry Potter and felt the bond doing something complicated in her chest, not the warm contentment she was used to, but something older and more urgent, a protective urgency that was responding to what he just said with the focused intensity of something identifying a threat. "You've been thinking about this for months," she said. "Since July. And you didn't say, I needed to understand it better before I said it to someone who would take it seriously." He met her gaze. "You take things seriously." She breathed out. Looked at the cobblestones. Looked back at him. "We need to talk to Apolline." "Yes. And eventually Dumbledore." He said it with the equanimity that still occasionally alarmed her. "Not yet. We need more information first. And I need to go to Hogwarts and establish what I actually have access to before I play any card I can't take back. That is, an extremely strategic assessment for someone buying school supplies." The corner of his mouth. "The two aren't mutually exclusive." She wanted, in that moment, to say several things that she was not going to say, because he was 10 years old and she was 17, and some things required patience even when patience felt entirely contrary to what the bond was communicating. She settled on, "All right. We think about it carefully. We tell Apolline. We plan." "Yes." "And Harry," she met his eyes. "If there is something of him in you, it is not you. You understand that?" He was quiet for a moment. The alley moved around them. Somewhere behind them, a child was laughing. "I know," he said. "I want you to actually know it. Not just say it." "I know," he said again, and this time it was different, quieter, more considered, the difference between a fact and a belief. "It doesn't feel like me. Whatever is in there. It feels like something that doesn't belong. I notice it sometimes, when my magic does something particularly large. Like a wrong note." "Good." She picked up her shopping bag. "Then we know what we're dealing with." They found Apolline at a cafe table at the alley's edge, dealing with what appeared to be 3 simultaneous owl messages with the focused efficiency of someone who has been the most competent person in every room she has entered for 30 years. She looked up, catalogued their faces, and folded her letters. "Tell me," she said. They told her. The cafe was small and the coffee was excellent, and Apolline listened to all of it without interrupting, which was more meaningful than most people's lengthy responses. When Harry finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Ragnarok mentioned something, this morning, when you were looking at the vault. I didn't say because I needed to think about it. The Gringotts curse-breaking team flagged your vault for examination in 1985. Not the gold vault. The family records vault, on the 7th level." She looked at Harry. "They found a magical signature in some of your father's research papers that they couldn't categorize. They flagged it and closed the file because there was no living claimant to authorize access." "What signature?" Harry said. "Dark magic. Old dark magic. Your father was researching it in the year before he died." She folded her hands. "I think he knew. Or suspected. I think he was trying to find a solution." The 3 of them sat with that for a moment. "I need to see those papers," Harry said. "Yes," Apolline said. "You do." She picked up her coffee. "I'll arrange a return visit." She looked at Harry over the rim of the cup with the expression she had sometimes, the one that was entirely Veela and entirely maternal in the specific way that meant she had decided something and would not be moved. "You are 10 years old, and you are carrying things no 10-year-old should carry. I want you to know that I see that." Harry looked at the table. "But I will not," she continued, "pretend those things are not there. You have asked me not to manage your information, and I have agreed to that, and I will keep that agreement." She put the coffee down. "What I ask in return is that you do not carry any of it alone. Not the Horcrux theory, not the wand connection, none of it. You have people now." The alley moved around them, bright and noisy and entirely ordinary. Harry looked up. His face had the complicated openness of someone learning, slowly, carefully, in the way of someone who has been hurt by the lesson before, to let things in. "Okay," he said. They walked back through the alley toward the leaky cauldron as the afternoon came in warm and gold. Fleur walked beside Harry, bags of school things between them, and the bond was doing its steady warm hum that she was starting to find as natural as breathing. They were almost at the pub door when Harry said, quietly, "Fleur. That book I picked up. In Flourish and Blots. The Veela History one. Yes. It has a chapter on guardian bonds. The historical ones." She looked straight ahead. "I know. It says the 1743 bond ended when the Veela died, and the human lived another 40 years, and never formed another significant magical connection." He paused. "And it says the 1612 bond, Harry. The 1612 bond was the only one on record where both parties survived to adulthood. And it says that when they did, Harry. He stopped. Looked at her. The pub door was 3 feet away and the London afternoon was warm and she was going to have this conversation eventually, she knew, and she had been planning to have it in a few years when he was older and she was more prepared and there was less alley and more, somewhere private with adequate warning. I know what it says, she told him, quietly and precisely. I have read that chapter 4 times. I will read it 40 more times. And when you are older and the bond has evolved to the point where that chapter becomes immediately relevant rather than theoretically relevant, she met his eyes, we will talk about it properly. With honesty and without pretending it isn't what it is. He held her gaze. Okay, he said, and pushed the pub door open. The fire in the leaky cauldron grate was warm and green gold, and Harry stepped through first, and Fleur followed, and the bond hummed between them like something that had been waiting a very long time to be exactly what it was. Chapter 4, Hogwarts has rules. Harry has opinions. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and Harry was on the platform at 10:15. Not because he was anxious. He had told Fleur he wasn't anxious and he meant it in the way he meant most things, accurately, having checked. He was early because he wanted to watch the platform fill, to see the shape of the world he was entering before it had a chance to form opinions about him. Information first. Everything else after. Apolline had come with him through the barrier. Fleur had come too, which was not strictly necessary given that she was returning to Beauxbatons via a separate French ministry portkey at noon, but she had come anyway and neither of them had remarked on it. She stood on platform 9 3/4 in a pale grey jacket with her hair pinned back and looked entirely composed, which Harry had learned to read as meaning the opposite. "You have the cloak," she said. "In my trunk. The research papers, Apolline has them. She'll send anything relevant by owl. The bond," she stopped. Reformulated. "Over that distance it will feel like a pressure. At first. You will adapt to it. You've told me this twice. I'm telling you again. Fleur." "What?" He looked at her with the direct attention he gave to things that mattered. "I'll be fine. I know you'll be fine. I'm not worried about fine. Fine is a very low bar." She looked at the train, then back at him. "Right. Every week. More than that. Every few days," he said. "More if something interesting happens. Everything that happens to you is interesting. That's either a compliment or a warning." "Both," she said. Apolline embraced him, properly, the way she had learned he could accept it now, which had taken until June to establish and which he had allowed in the specific careful way of someone learning that a particular touch means safety. He stood with it for a moment, then stepped back. "You'll owl me about the 7th level vault," he said. "The moment Ragnarok confirms access," Apolline said. "Behave yourself." "I'll behave exactly as much as is warranted by circumstances," Harry said. She looked at him. He looked back. She sighed in the specific Apolline way that meant she found something genuinely funny and was declining to confirm it. He picked up his trunk, called Hedwig's cage up with a gesture that still occasionally made nearby muggles do double takes, and got on the train. He found a compartment near the back, stowed his trunk, and sat with Hedwig's cage beside him and his advanced magical theory open on his lap. The platform noise filled the window and he let it be background, reading. The compartment door opened at 10:45. The girl who looked in had bushy brown hair, an alert expression, and the specific bearing of someone who has done advanced research on every topic she expected to encounter today. Her eyes went to his forehead, the scar, and then immediately to the book in his lap, and she recalibrated visibly, from celebrity to reader, and this improved Harry's opinion of her considerably. "Every other compartment is full," she said. "May I?" "Yes." She sat down and arranged herself and her bag with organized precision. "Hermione Granger," she said. "Harry Potter." I know, she said. I've read about you. Though I expect most of what's written isn't accurate. Almost none of it, he confirmed. I thought so. The books are quite vague on specifics. The mechanics of a killing curse rebound alone raise about 6 unanswered questions that nobody seems to have documented properly. She looked at the book in his lap. Is that the Arsenault edition? 3rd edition. You know it? I've been working through the 2nd. My parents are dentists, she added, as though this explained something, which to Harry it did, a muggle-born who had done 3 months of independent reading before arriving on the train. I've been trying to establish the theoretical framework before I get there, so I'm not starting from zero. The introductory texts they put on the supply list are rather basic. They're very basic, Harry agreed. The theory section in Chapter 4 has 2 errors in it. She looked at him with the expression of someone meeting a correct opinion. The causal sequence for transfiguration initiation. Yes, and the source citation for the elemental boundary work, which is 15 years out of date. There was a brief silence of mutual recognition. Where were you educated before Hogwarts? She asked. France. Private tutor. He paused. Where are you going and expecting to be sorted? Gryffindor, I think, though I wouldn't be unhappy with Ravenclaw. She said it with the honest self-assessment of someone who has thought about it. You? He considered. I don't know. The hat will decide. You must have a preference. I have opinions about all of them. I don't think any one house will contain everything I am. She looked at him for a moment. Then, that's a very interesting way to put it. It's accurate. They talked for most of the journey, about theory, about the supply list's inadequacies, about Hermione's own summer preparation and Harry's work with Arsenault. It was the kind of conversation that accelerated as it went, each exchange opening a new door, and by the time the landscape outside had gone thoroughly northern and dark, Harry had established several things about Hermione Granger. She was the most rigorously prepared muggle-born first year he was likely to encounter. She had a tendency toward authority as a framework which was going to create friction at Hogwarts until she learned to apply it selectively, and she was genuinely, interestingly, intelligent in the specific way of people who have never been allowed to be bored. He also met Ron Weasley, briefly, when Ron looked in asking if anyone had seen a toad. He had red hair and freckles and a smear of something on his nose and the easy manner of someone from a large family who had never had to perform confidence. Harry told him no toad, offered him a chocolate frog from his supply, and Ron sat down for 20 minutes and talked about Quidditch with a genuine enthusiasm that was infectious even for someone who had never flown. He was, Harry thought, uncomplicated in the best way, the way a person is uncomplicated when they're simply being what they are without editing. He went back to find his toad eventually. Hermione went with him to help, in the manner of someone who finds a problem unacceptable until it is solved. Harry went back to his book. The sorting was a more theatrical version of what he'd expected. The enchanted ceiling, the floating candles, the 4 long house tables filling with noise as each name was called. Harry stood in the line of first years and watched the hall with the specific attention he'd applied to the platform that morning, mapping, cataloging. The professor's table. Dumbledore at center, watching the new students with an expression that Harry could read now, after the kitchen meeting, as the particular warmth of a man doing exactly what he intends. McGonagall with her sharp eyes and excellent posture. Others he didn't know yet. Potter, Harry. The hall went very quiet. He walked to the stool and sat down, and the hat descended over his eyes and the world went interior. Well, said a voice that was entirely inside his head. This is unusual. Harry waited. I've sorted 1,100 students in my operational lifetime. I have never sorted one with a A pause that felt like something large moving in a small space. There's a great deal of you, isn't there? And something else. Something that isn't you. Yes, Harry thought back. Doesn't bother you? Not today. Interesting. Another pause. You do well in Slytherin. The strategic thinking, the self-possession, you move through rooms like a Slytherin. You read people the way Slytherins read people. A considering beat. But you don't want power for its own sake. You want information. You want to understand things. Something thoughtful now, thorough. Ravenclaw would suit the academic appetite. But there's something else, the thing that sat in a cupboard for 8 years and didn't break. The thing that walked into the Dursley kitchen with a strange woman and said, "Where are we going?" and just went. That's not Ravenclaw. That's something older. Harry said nothing. Gryffindor, the hat said, with the finality of something that has found the right key. But you already knew that, didn't you? Not the obvious kind of brave. The kind that looks like calm. Then aloud, to the hall, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. He walked over and sat down, and the noise washed around him, and the bond gave a warm pulse from whatever distance Fleur was at, bows batons, already, or nearly, as though acknowledging, noted. All right. He wrote the letter that night, by candlelight in the first-year dormitory while the other boys were still busy marveling at their beds. Sorted into Gryffindor. The hat had opinions. Tell you in person when you visit. The castle is extremely large and slightly haunted. I need the Arsenault supplementary texts, the ones from the third-year curriculum. The first-year work is going to be approximately 4 months behind where I am now, and I refuse to sit idle. H. He sent it with Hedwig, who left through the tower window with the authoritative purpose of a bird who considers postal work a personal calling. The first week of Hogwarts was informative in the way a new terrain is informative. You learned it by moving through it. The work itself was, as anticipated, behind. Harry sat through the introductory lessons with the patience of someone who understands that the structure exists for reasons and must be negotiated rather than simply bypassed, and did the work as set, and did not correct professors unless they made errors significant enough to affect methodology. This happened once in the first week, a detail in Professor Flitwick's charm theory introduction that had a small but meaningful gap in its causal logic, and Harry waited until after class and said, privately, I think there might be a step missing between the will to form and the expression mechanism. Arsenault's work on the French foundational curriculum suggests the intention alignment step is. Flitwick looked at him with the bright, quick attention of a small man who has been teaching for 40 years and still genuinely enjoys being surprised. Arsenault's third edition? Yes, Professor. Come back Thursday at 4, Flitwick said. Bring the book. That was the first one. By the third week there were 2 more, McGonagall, who discovered Harry's transfiguration instincts during the match-to-needle lesson when he transfigured his match perfectly on the first attempt, and then, while waiting for the rest of the class, quietly transfigured it into 4 other objects and back just to test the limits of the exercise, and who detained him afterward not for discipline but for a 30-minute conversation about advanced application that left him with a reading list and the first sense that Hogwarts might contain people worth learning from. And Snape, who was a more complicated case. Snape looked at him on the first day with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously and none of them friendly. He asked his famous impossible questions and Harry answered 2 of them, not showing off, but because he'd read ahead and the questions were answerable and he saw no reason to perform ignorance. Snape's expression went through a very quick sequence. Disbelief. Reassessment. Something that might have been the beginning of reluctant interest before it locked back into professional hostility. 5 points to Gryffindor, he said, which seemed to cause him minor physical discomfort. Hermione, beside Harry, had looked between them with the expression of someone watching a chess match that opened unexpectedly. After class she said, he hated your father. I know. He's going to take it out on you. He's going to try, Harry said. But he's a good enough teacher that I think we can work around his feelings about my father if I'm careful not to give him personal angles to use. He paused. And I'm better at potions than my father was by all accounts, which will eventually become impossible for him to ignore. Hermione looked at him for a moment. You've thought about this quite a lot. I think about most things quite a lot. Ron had found them by the end of the first week, drawn initially by Hermione's note-sharing and Harry's inexhaustible supply of information, and then staying because the three of them were, it turned out, unexpectedly functional together, Ron's instinctive social intelligence smoothing the places where Harry's directness and Hermione's academic aggression occasionally produced friction. On the Friday evening of the second week, Ron said, "You know, people have been talking about you." "I know. You don't seem bothered." "I'm not." Percy said. He paused. "Percy's my brother, he's a prefect. He said people expected you to be different." "Different how?" Ron thought about it. "I dunno. More," he gestured vaguely. "Saved by magic, why? Like a hero in a story. You know. The chosen one-ness." Harry looked at his potions essay. "I was 1 year old when whatever happened happened. I didn't choose it and I didn't do anything strategic. A very powerful dark wizard tried to kill me, and for reasons we still don't fully understand the magic rebounded." He dipped his quill. "That's not hero in a story. That's surviving something random and everyone building a story around the survival." Ron was quiet for a moment. "That's not what the books say. The books are wrong about most of it." "Yeah, you said." Ron leaned back in his chair. "So what are you actually, then? If not the chosen one thing?" Harry thought about it honestly. "Someone with considerable magic, a specific enemy, and better preparation than that enemy expects," he said. "Which is actually more useful than a story." Ron looked at him for a long moment. Then he grinned, the wide, uncalculated grin that was Ron's most honest mode. "You know, you're dead strange, but I think I like you." "Thank you," Harry said. "I think that's accurate on both counts." The owls from Fleur came every 3 days, as agreed. They were not long letters. She was 5 years older and at school herself, and her 7th year at Beauxbatons was academically demanding in ways she had mentioned, with the specific controlled frustration of someone who finds most competition insufficiently competitive. But they were dense. She wrote the way she talked, economical, precise, with occasional flashes of dry humor that came through even in ink. He wrote back with the same frequency and gradually with more, things that happened at Hogwarts that he found interesting, things he was reading, thoughts about the Horcrux research that Apolline was slowly working through from his father's papers. The letters built on each other, each one extending a conversation that was continuous even across the distance. He noticed the pull the elders had described. It was not painful, more like a directional awareness, a persistent sense of which way was north even when you weren't looking for it. He could feel when she was working late, when she was frustrated, once when something happened he didn't have context for, and the bond spiked with an urgency that woke him at 2 in the morning in the dormitory. He wrote immediately, "Are you all right?" Something happened at approximately 2 a.m. Her reply came by noon the next day, minor incident. A Beauxbatons boy made a specific kind of mistake and learned why that was an error. "I am perfectly fine. Go to class." He went to class and did not ask for specifics, and she did not offer them, which he respected, though the bond's protective resonance sat hot in his chest for most of the morning. The Quirrell situation he identified in October. It was not obvious. Quirrell was a good performance, the stammer, the nervous energy, the impression of someone who had been slightly broken by the world and was doing their best. Harry's estimate of it took 2 weeks of observation. The stammer dropped when Quirrell was engaged in technical thinking. His knowledge of dark magic was precise and current in a way inconsistent with someone who had suffered a bad encounter with dark forces, and the smell of the classroom, faint, specific, something that Harry's magical instincts flagged without being able to immediately name. He wrote to Fleur, "There is something wrong with the defense professor. The smell in his classroom is wrong. I don't have the vocabulary for it, but it feels like old dark magic. The kind that's been alive a long time." Her reply came within 12 hours. "Stay away from him outside of class. Don't let him know you've noticed. Tell me if the smell changes or gets stronger. I'm contacting Apolline. He did all three of those things. He also went to the library and spent 2 sessions in the restricted section. He'd got Flitwick's signature on a general advanced study access note, and the librarian, Madame Pants, had examined Harry, and decided that a student who could cite Arsenault from memory probably wasn't there to cause trouble. In the restricted section he found what he needed in an index of dark magical signatures from a curse-breaking reference text. The smell was Quirrell's turban and what was living under it. He sat very still in the restricted section for a moment. Then he went back to the dormitory and wrote 2 letters, one to Fleur, one to Apolline. Both said the same thing in precise, factual terms: Voldemort is in the castle. He's attached to Quirrell's body somehow. Back of the head, I think. He never turns away from the class, always faces the board when writing. And then, there is something in the castle he wants. The 3rd floor corridor, it's warded beyond what a school needs for safety. Something is being kept there. Apolline's reply came by the next morning. It was 4 lines: do not engage. Do not investigate the corridor. Dumbledore is aware of the situation. I have made contact through the council. He believes it is contained. I am not yet satisfied with his assessment. Wait. He waited. He was good at waiting. It was one of the things the Dursleys had inadvertently taught him well. He watched Quirrell in class and took precise, correct notes, and did not give any indication of what he knew, and thought about the Philosopher's Stone, which was what he'd worked out was in the corridor, because the logic was not particularly difficult to follow once you knew there was something there. In November, Dumbledore called him to his office. Harry had been expecting it. He went up the spiral staircase on a Tuesday after dinner and sat in the chair across from the headmaster's desk with his hands in his lap and waited. Dumbledore looked at him over his half-moon spectacles. "You've been doing remarkable work in your classes," he said. "Your professors speak very highly of you." "Thank you, Professor. You've also been spending considerable time in the library." "In the restricted section." He said it without accusation, which was the particular Dumbledore mode that was most demanding to navigate, not confrontational, not approving, simply present. "Professor Flitwick's access note covers general advanced study," Harry said. "I've been supplementing the curriculum." "Of course." A pause. "Harry. I want to ask you something directly." "All right. Are you aware of any concerns regarding the safety of the 3rd floor corridor?" Harry held the old man's gaze. He could feel the question's shape, not whether Harry knew about the corridor, but whether Harry was going to try to investigate it, whether he needed to be managed. Harry thought about Apolline's letter. Dumbledore is aware. I am not yet satisfied with his assessment. I'm aware it's sealed beyond standard safety requirements, Harry said. And that something valuable is being stored there. And that Professor Quirrell has an interest in it. Dumbledore was very still. I also know why Quirrell has an interest in it, Harry said. The smell in that classroom is very specific. I spent 2 sessions in the restricted section confirming my identification of it. Harry, I'm not planning to investigate the corridor, Harry said. That's not my job, and I don't have enough information to act usefully. I'm also 11 years old. He said it the way Fleur said it, as a factual parameter rather than a limitation. What I would like to know is whether you have the situation managed, or whether the plan is to wait until something forces the issue. Dumbledore studied him for a long moment. He had the look that Harry had seen in their first meeting in the Delacour kitchen, something recalibrating behind the warmth, the specific expression of a man who has been managing things long enough that he is not used to having his management examined. I have precautions in place, Dumbledore said. Through the stone's protection layers. Yes. And if someone moves through them? There are, Dumbledore said carefully, other elements to the plan. Harry looked at him. He understood, in that moment, what the other elements probably were, understood with a clarity that felt like something cold dropping through him. He was the other element. He had always been the other element. The stone was bait, the corridor was bait, and the outcome of whatever happened down there was something Dumbledore had planned for, with Harry's eventual involvement as a feature rather than a problem. He kept his face entirely neutral. "I see," he said. "Harry, I appreciate you telling me," Harry said, which was a specific kind of response, and Dumbledore recognized it as such. Harry could see him recognize it. "Is there anything else?" There was a pause that was doing several things simultaneously. "How is the Delacour family?" Dumbledore asked. "Well," Harry said. "Fleur's 7th year is demanding. Apolline sends her best." He stood up. "Thank you for meeting with me, Professor." He walked back down the spiral staircase and across the castle and into the Gryffindor common room, and sat by the fire, and wrote his letter. "He's using the stone as a trap. For Quirrell or Voldemort or both. And he expects me to be involved in the resolution. I think that's been the plan since before I arrived. He has something specific in mind about what I'm supposed to do." He paused. "I'm not going to do it on his terms. Whatever happens down that corridor happens because I choose it, not because the board is set for me. But I need to know what the stone's protection layers actually are. Can Apolline find out through the council?" 3 days later, Fleur's response: "She already did. I'm sending the details separately, secure owl, not this one. 7 protection layers, 1 per professor. The logic is clear, each layer requires the skill of a specific teacher. A fully capable wizard could move through all 7, but it would require broad competence and significant time." A pause in the writing. He could see where the quill had lifted and come back down. "Harry. He put an 11-year-old in a castle with Voldemort. I want you to understand I am choosing very careful words here instead of the words I actually want to use." "I know," he wrote back. "But he's not wrong that I'll probably be involved regardless. He's wrong that it should be on his schedule or his terms." "There is a difference," she wrote, and the quill strokes were slightly harder than usual, between what is inevitable and what is acceptable. "Yes," he agreed. "That difference is the point." December came in with wind and frost and the castle doing the particular stone-cold thing that required layering up and proximity to fires. Most students went home for Christmas. Harry stayed. He stayed because Apolline's research into the 7th level vault had produced something, and she was coming to London on the 23rd and bringing the relevant documents, and he needed to see them. He stayed also because Hermione was going home but Ron wasn't, and having one friend in the castle was preferable to a completely empty common room. He stayed because the pull that had been a steady northward pressure since September was going to reduce by half when Fleur came back to France for the holidays, and while he was adapted to the distance, less distance was better. He didn't over-examine why. He had made a deal with himself in the summer to be honest about things when they became relevant and not before. On the 22nd of December, the evening before Apolline was due, he went up to the astronomy tower. Not for any particular reason. He walked the castle a lot, had mapped it thoroughly in October including several passages that weren't on any official plan, and the tower was good for thinking. Clear and cold and high up and entirely empty. He stood at the parapet and looked out at the grounds, the lake, dark and still and vast, the forbidden forest at the edge of the light, the Quidditch pitch in its winter-empty state, and let his magic settle into the way it did when he gave it space without directing it. The bloom he'd been practicing since summer was more refined now. He could calibrate it, could send it outward in a controlled wave and pull it back without the shakiness of the orchard attempt. He did it now, gently, let it move outward from the tower like a stone dropped in water, felt it touch the edges of the wards and come back. And in it, the way a dog hears frequencies past human range, he felt the wrongness from the 3rd-floor corridor. Not threatening him, not reaching. Just present. Patient. "You're waiting too," he thought at it. No response, obviously. He was 11 years old on an astronomy tower in December, talking to Voldemort via passive magical emission, which was perhaps not entirely standard. He pulled his magic back and looked at the lake. The bond warmed in his chest, distant but present, Fleur 300 miles south and awake despite the hour. He could feel the quality of wakefulness, the particular alertness of someone thinking rather than restless. He sent a small pulse back along it, not a message, just an acknowledgement, here. Fine. A moment later the warmth in his chest increased a fraction. Here. Fine. He stood at the tower parapet in the December dark and thought about his father's research in the 7th level vault, and Dumbledore's careful plans, and Voldemort under the turban 3 floors below him, and the Hollyan Phoenix feather wand in his pocket, and the cloak folded in his trunk. He thought about Fleur saying, the difference between what is inevitable and what is acceptable. He thought, I am not going to let anyone set the board. Then he went inside, because it was genuinely cold and there was no strategic advantage in frostbite. Chapter 5, The Triwizard Tournament wasn't designed for this. 3 years changed things. Not gradually, the way people describe change when they're being poetic about it, slowly, like a tide. It happened in specific moments that Harry could have listed if asked. The night in first year he walked down to the 3rd floor corridor alone and faced Quirrell and what lived behind his turban, and the thing that had happened with the Horcrux fragment when Voldemort reached for Harry and found something waiting that he hadn't planned for. The summer after first year when Apolline sat them both down with his father's papers and laid out what James Potter had theorized in the months before his death, fragmented, incomplete, but directionally correct. The day in second year when the chamber opened and Harry went into it without telling anyone except Fleur because she would have come regardless. Third year and Sirius and everything that unraveled and then was partially, carefully rewoven. Harry was 14 now and Hogwarts had learned certain things about him and had mostly stopped being surprised by them, which was the natural outcome of 3 years of consistent behavior. He was at the top of his year in every subject by a margin that had stopped being remarkable and started being structural. It was simply the landscape of his academic existence. Flitwick used his work as a reference example. McGonagall had given him 6th-year transfiguration material in the 3rd term of his 2nd year without ceremony, sliding it across her desk with the expression of someone acknowledging a fait accompli. Even Snape, and this had been the slow work of 3 years of precise, careful non-provocation and consistent excellence, had reached a functional working relationship that neither of them named but both of them maintained. Harry did exceptional potions work and did not make it personal. Snape assessed it correctly and did not fail it for reasons unconnected to quality. This was the entire arrangement and it held. The wandless work had continued, privately, and was now at a level Harry didn't advertise but also didn't conceal when it became relevant. He'd used it twice in situations where speed mattered more than subtlety, once in the chamber, once in 3rd year with a specific Dementor problem that he had resolved before the Patronus could fully form, which had surprised him as much as anyone. The Patronus itself, when it did form, was a stag, which told him something about his father and about magic's memory that he turned over occasionally and didn't talk about much. The invisibility cloak had been invaluable. He wore it when he needed to think without performing anything for anyone, which was more often than people might have assumed for someone who projected as much self-possession as Harry did. Even confident people needed rooms of their own occasionally. And Fleur had visited 3 times a year for 3 years, and the letters had continued, and the bond had done what the elders had said it would do, evolved, deepened, complicated itself in ways that neither of them addressed directly and both of them were aware of constantly. She was 20 now. He was 14. The distance between those numbers was less mathematical than it used to be and they both knew it and were handling it with the specific careful honesty they had agreed on, acknowledging the evolution when it happened, not acting on what the acting required them to be to each other yet. It was a live wire they'd been holding for 3 years without touching and some days it was harder than others. The Triwizard Tournament was announced in September of 4th year and Harry's first thought, sitting at the Gryffindor table in the Great Hall listening to Dumbledore explain the details, was not excitement or interest but a cold, specific recognition. This is a trap. Not for him specifically. Not yet. But the structure of it, 1 champion per school, a binding magical contract, tasks designed to test limits, an unprecedented gathering of wizarding talent at Hogwarts, was the kind of structure that someone with specific intentions could exploit. And Harry had spent 3 years becoming very good at identifying the shape of exploits. He wrote to Fleur that night. "The tournament. Tell me you're not entering." Her reply came with unusual speed. "I am entering. I am the strongest 7th year at Beauxbatons, and the goblet is a legitimate test of magical competence. Don't be ridiculous." A pause in the writing he could feel even in ink. "I need you to understand that I have decided this independently of the bond. I am not entering because I want to be near you. I am entering because I am good enough to win." "I know you are," he wrote back. "That's not why I'm concerned." He paused, thinking about how to say the next part accurately. "The tournament structure this year is irregular. Dumbledore is more engaged than I'd expect for an educational competition. Someone wants something from this and I don't know yet what it is. Be careful." "I am always careful," she wrote. "You be careful. You're the one with a dark wizard who has repeatedly tried to use your school as a venue." He was careful. He was careful right up until the Goblet of Fire spat out a 4th piece of parchment on the night of the goblet selection, and the name on it was his. The Great Hall's silence when Dumbledore read it was a specific, textured thing, different from the usual Hogwarts silences. Hermione made a sharp sound beside him. Ron went rigid. Across the hall, the Beauxbatons delegation sat in a perfect, controlled tableau, and Harry found Fleur in it immediately, silver blonde hair, pale grey eyes, and an expression of absolute stillness that he knew was not calm. He stood up. Because there was nothing else to do, his name had been called and the contract was binding and the situation was what it was. He walked to the front of the hall. He did not look confused. He did not look frightened. He was 14 years old and had faced Voldemort twice and a basilisk and a Dementor swarm, and the expression on his face as he walked toward the champion's room was the one the castle had learned over 3 years, alert, measured, interested in the situation rather than alarmed by it. Dumbledore caught up with him in the antechamber. "Harry. Are you all right?" "Someone entered my name," Harry said. "Not me." He looked at the old man. "You know that. The goblet doesn't make mistakes, I know. It was manipulated." He looked at the other champions, Cedric Diggory from Hufflepuff, Victor Krum from Durmstrang, and Fleur, who was standing with her arms folded and watching him with an expression that was doing several very controlled things simultaneously. "The contract is binding. I'm in the tournament. What I want to know is who entered my name and what they want to happen at the end of it." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "That," he said, "is what I intend to find out." "Good," Harry said. "Tell me when you know something." He looked at the other champions. Cedric was watching him with a careful, assessing gaze that Harry respected. Cedric was not assuming, just reading. Krum was doing the same, the specific assessment of a competitive athlete encountering an unknown variable. "I'm sorry for the disruption to the competition," Harry said to both of them, with genuine directness. "This wasn't my choice." Cedric nodded. "I believe you." Krum said nothing, but his eyes did something that was the nearest thing to acknowledgement Harry had ever seen from someone who communicated primarily in competitive silence. Then Harry looked at Fleur. She looked back at him. 3 years of letters and visits and the bond's quiet continuous evolution were all present in that look, compressed and dense, and what she communicated in it was several things in rapid sequence. "I am furious. Not at you. At the situation. I am also worried, which is separate from furious, and I need a moment to manage both before I say anything." Harry said, quietly, so the others wouldn't hear, "I'll talk to you tonight." She gave a fractional nod. The conversation that night was in the corridor outside the Gryffindor portrait hole, at 11:30, after Harry had been debriefed by Dumbledore and the Ministry officials and McGonagall and had sat through it all with contained patience. Fleur was waiting when he arrived, leaning against the stone wall with her arms crossed. He sat down against the opposite wall. They looked at each other in the low torchlight. The bond spiked when your name was called, she said. I know. I felt it. It spiked like it does when you're in actual danger. Not competitive risk danger. Danger. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. The torchlight moved and her hair caught it. Someone is using this tournament to access you in a way that has consequences. The binding contract means you can't withdraw without magical backlash. You are required to compete, to be in specific places at specific times, and at least one of those tasks will be life-threatening by design. She looked at the ceiling briefly. This is Voldemort. It's Voldemort's plan, Harry said. He's not here directly. Not yet. But yes, the tournament is the mechanism. He had worked most of it out in the hour between the champion ceremony and his interviews with the ministry. There's someone at Hogwarts managing it for him. A Death Eater. Someone with enough access to put my name in the goblet. Moody, she said. He looked at her. The defense professor. He arrived this year. She said it in the precise tone she used when she'd been thinking about something for a while and had reached a conclusion. He watches you differently than the others. Not curiosity, assessment. He's tracking your preparation, your capabilities. Someone feeding information about you to Voldemort would watch you exactly that way. Harry had noticed Moody's attention. He'd put it in the suspicious but uncategorized column pending more information. Fleur's read was, probably right. If I expose him now, Voldemort's timeline accelerates, Harry said. He'll find another mechanism. So we let him run. For now. Until I understand where the plan ends. It ends somewhere specific, probably the third task, based on how these things tend to go. He looked at her. I need to be better prepared than Voldemort expects. Which means I need information about what the tasks will involve before I'm in them. The first task, Fleur said. It's in 2 weeks. The champions are supposed to learn only on the morning of the task. Yes. Which means someone with full information would have a significant advantage. They looked at each other. I have Beauxbaton's contacts in every department of the French ministry, Fleur said. And the French ministry has a Triwizard liaison who has been in communication with the British organizers. I need to know what it is without the knowledge being traceable, Harry said. I know how to do that. She pushed off the wall and stood up. I'll have something by Sunday. She looked down at him. Harry. Yeah. When this ends, wherever it ends, you are not going alone. He opened his mouth. I am a Triwizard champion, she said, with the specific flat calm of someone stating a thing that is not negotiable. I am competing in the same tasks. Whatever the end point of this plan is, we will arrive at it from directions that converge, not from opposite ends of the castle. The bond resonated with something that was not quite warmth, more like certainty. The specific certainty of something very large that has decided. That is not the bond talking. That is me talking. I want you to know the difference. I know the difference, Harry said. She nodded once and walked back toward the Beauxbatons' quarters. He sat in the corridor for a while after she left, in the particular quiet of late Hogwarts, the torches burning low, the castle breathing around him. He thought, this is what she meant. The difference between inevitable and acceptable. The first task was dragons. Fleur had the information by Saturday morning, a 3-line message that said simply, nesting mothers. 1 egg. There will be 4. Your dragon will be chosen by lot. He had 2 weeks. He used them. He researched every documented dragon species in the Hogwarts library, cross-referenced with Arsenault's notes on magical creature response behavior which he'd been sent in second year, and built a tactical picture of each one's sensory profile, attack pattern, and behavioral pressure points. He also practiced something he'd been developing since second year, a spell of his own modification, built on summoning charm mechanics but with an additional resonance layer that could affect the auditory perception of a large magical creature. Not a charm that existed in any textbook. Something he'd assembled from component theory. He tested it on the suit of armor on the 4th floor corridor, then on a small magical creature he borrowed briefly from Hagrid's hut under the cloak, then on nothing, because the armor and the creature were not the scale of a nesting dragon and he was going to have to trust his construction on the day. On the morning of the task, he stood in the champion waiting area and looked at the egg number he'd drawn and thought, Chinese fireball. Good. Direct attack profile, auditory sensitivity in the upper register, nesting behavior that created a predictable field. Cedric went first. He transfigured a rock into a dog to distract his Swedish short snout, competent, quick, good instincts. The crowd responded. Crumb went second. He partially transfigured his dragon's eyes, brutal and effective, though the dragon's thrashing damaged several of its own eggs in the process, which cost him points. Crumb didn't look pleased about the eggs. Fleur went third. Harry watched from the entrance tunnel. She walked into the arena with the particular quality she had that was entirely her own, not the glamour, which she kept restrained in public because it was unfair and she found relying on it tedious, but the specific way she moved through a space as though the space had been arranged for her rather than the other way around. She faced the common Welsh green and did something Harry had never seen her do in any of their practice sessions, she sang. Not loudly. A low, specific sound, something in the old dialect she'd taught him fragments of over the years, the kind of sound that was less music than vibration. The dragon's eyes went glassy. It swayed. It lowered its enormous head to the ground in a slow, progressive relaxation, and Fleur walked past it to the golden egg, picked it up, and walked back, and the crowd made the sound crowds make when something beautiful and slightly terrifying has happened. Harry thought, she's been practicing that since she knew about the dragons. His turn. He walked into the arena and the fireball raised its head and its neck frill spread and it was, objectively, very large. The crowd's noise was a wall behind him. He could feel the bond warm in his chest, Fleur in the stands, steady and present. He raised his wand, then lowered it. Not because he changed his mind. Because the summoning resonance modification worked wandlessly now, and he had decided during his second week preparation that using a wand for this was less efficient than using his instincts. It was a calculated choice, not a performance, but the crowd didn't know that. He sent the resonance out. High, clean, targeted, above the frequency range the dragon found natural, landing in the range that disrupted spatial orientation. The fireball's head swung. It blinked. Its fire reflex was tactile, not directional. It breathed flame in a wide arc away from him, scorching a section of empty arena, which was the point. He moved left, kept the resonance steady, and walked into the blind arc. The egg was on a nest of scorched rock. He picked it up. The dragon breathed fire again, still away from him, orientation disrupted. He walked out of the arc and held the egg up and the crowd erupted. He looked at the judges' table. Dumbledore was watching him with the expression that was very carefully not expressing anything, which was how Harry knew it was significant. Bagman was grinning. Maxime looked between Harry and Fleur with an expression he interpreted as tactical calculation. The ministry official whose name he hadn't bothered to retain was writing something on a clipboard. Score, 47 out of 50. Joint highest with Fleur. Crumb 1 point behind. He found Hermione and Ron in the chaos afterward. Hermione had her hands pressed to her face. Ron had been complicated this year, a brief period of envious distance following the announcement that Harry suspected had less to do with the competition and more to do with a 14-year-old's feelings about his friend suddenly becoming even more visible than he'd been. They'd talked about it in October, directly, which was not how most 14-year-olds resolve things but was the only way Harry knew how to do it. Ron had been red-faced and honest and they'd come out the other side more solid than before. "You didn't use your wand," Ron said, immediately, bypassing entirely any normal reaction to his friend having just outwitted a dragon. "I know. You just stood there and the dragon went," he made a gesture indicating confused dragon. "Resonance disruption. I've been working on it since second year." Hermione took her hands off her face. Her expression was the one she got when she was very proud of something she was also slightly alarmed by. "The wandless application at that scale, Harry, I know," he said. "It worked." "It worked," she agreed, in the tone of someone confirming a hypothesis they had secretly hoped for. Fleur found him an hour later in the corridor outside the Great Hall. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Resonance disruption," she said. "Singing," he said. A brief silence. "I didn't know you'd developed that," she said. "I didn't know about the singing." He paused. "When did you, third year?" "Grandmother Celeste." She paused. "She took me as a student." Something shifted in his chest that wasn't the bond. "She said she didn't take students." "She changed her mind." "About you specifically." "Apparently." The corner of her mouth. "She called it an investment in the Guardian bond." "I chose not to argue with her." He looked at her and thought about the 143-year-old Veela elder who had said I do not take students and then spent 3 years teaching Fleur, who had then stood in a dragon arena and made a Welsh green fall asleep, and thought, right, yes, of course. 47 each, he said. "Yes. If you beat me at the end of this I'm going to be annoyed." "If you beat me I am going to be considerably more than annoyed," she said. It was, Harry recognized, the most normal conversation he'd had all day, and he felt something uncoil in his chest that he hadn't noticed was wound tight. The second task came in February. The golden egg screech had taken them all several days to decode. Hermione got there first. She recognized it as a distorted form of the old Nordic variant that merged into the wizarding language family Fleur had studied, and together the three of them, plus Fleur in increasingly rapid owl exchanges, worked out what it said. Something would be taken. Something important. Harry had 1 hour to reclaim it from the lake. What they took was Ron. Harry stood on the lake shore at dawn on February 24 and understood that the tournament had correctly assessed what mattered to him and selected it. Ron, sleeping magically, breathing through some aquatic charm, held at the lake's bottom by mere people. He had an hour to retrieve him. He had also worked out that he did not particularly need gillyweed. This was not arrogance. This was the product of 12 weeks of aquatic environment theory following his decode of the egg, building on the elemental boundary work he'd studied extensively from a French foundational text that Fleur had sent in November. He could not breathe underwater indefinitely. But he could cast a sustained bubblehead charm and he could move through water with a locomotion application he'd tested in the prefect's bathroom in January, and he could do both wandlessly. The cannon fired and he dove. The lake was cold and dark and then, 50 feet down, luminous in the strange way of deep water with magic in it. He moved fast, faster than the other champions would because the locomotion charm let him direct his trajectory with precision rather than the brute physicality of swimming. He found the merpeople's settlement 20 minutes in, following the faint acoustic trail of their singing, and he found the 4 hostages arranged on a rock shelf in the settlement center. Ron, Hermione, Cho Chang, and Gabrielle Delacour. Harry went still in the water. Gabrielle, Fleur's sister, 9 years old, breathing through whatever aquatic spell the tournament had used, her blonde hair moving slow in the current. Looking exactly like the 6-year-old who had braided grass into his hair in the summer orchard for 40 minutes. He looked at the mere people watching him. He looked at the 4 hostages. He thought very briefly about the rules, 1 hostage each, 1 per champion, and then he did not think about the rules anymore. He extracted all 4. He did it in under 4 minutes. He had Wan's free hands and the locomotion charm and a specific rapid application of the bubblehead extension he'd worked out theoretically and was now applying practically, and he moved through the extraction with the focused efficiency of someone who has decided that the rules of a competition are significantly less important than 4 people's safety. He surfaced with all 4 hostages. The crowd's reaction was unusual. There was applause, certainly, but also a particular confused noise, the sound of people processing something that did not fit the category they'd prepared. The judges conferred for a considerable time. He sat on the lake shore with Ron, who was spluttering and confused and deeply objecting to being woken up by cold water, and dried himself with a charm, and waited. Fleur arrived on the shore 30 seconds after him. She had entered the water and made it perhaps 200 feet before Harry surfaced with all 4 hostages. She was soaking and breathing hard, and she looked at Gabrielle, who was wrapped in a towel and eating a biscuit provided by the Hogwarts staff, and something happened in her expression that Harry had only seen a few times, the specific fracture of someone dropping every constructed surface at once. She crossed to Gabrielle in 3 strides and pulled her into a fierce, sustained hug that Gabrielle accepted with the practical tolerance of a 9-year-old who has a dramatic older sister. Then she looked at Harry over Gabrielle's head. He held her gaze and said nothing because nothing needed to be said, and he had learned a long time ago that Fleur didn't need words in moments that were operating above that frequency. She looked away. Composed herself with the speed of someone very practiced at it. And then she looked back and the expression was different, professional again, champion again, and underneath it something that was entirely their own business. The judges gave him 45 points, the deduction for taking all 4 instead of 1, balanced against the time advantage and the outstanding magical application. He was in 2nd place overall, half a point behind Fleur. She did not let him forget this. The letters for the next 3 weeks mentioned it with a frequency and precision that was, he recognized, her version of being smug. He took it with equanimity and planned the 3rd task accordingly. Moody revealed himself in March. Not intentionally. He had been watching Harry too closely for too long and made one mistake. He directed a question in class that was not a teaching question but an assessment question, the specific language of someone mapping a subject's response to threat rather than testing knowledge. Harry recognized the pattern because he had been watching Moody with equal care for 5 months. After class he went to McGonagall. He told her what he'd observed, systematically, without drama, with the specific evidence-based structure he'd learned from his father's research papers. You make your case with evidence and you do not make it emotionally because emotional cases lose authority in bureaucratic settings. McGonagall listened with increasing stillness. When he finished she looked at him for a moment and then said, "I need you to let me handle this." "I understand," Harry said. "I want to be clear that by handle this you mean immediate investigation of the defense professor, not an investigation in which I am asked not to mention it to anyone and things proceed as planned." McGonagall's jaw set. "Come with me." They went to Dumbledore together. The discovery, the real Moody, imprisoned in his own trunk, the polyjuice potion, happened that evening. Bartemius Crouch Jr. was revealed, arrested, and administered Veritaserum before the sun was fully down, and in 40 minutes of interrogation, the full shape of Voldemort's plan was laid out. The portkey in the 3rd task's maze center. The graveyard. The ritual. Dumbledore wanted to change the 3rd task entirely, to pull Harry from it, to restructure the endpoint. Harry said no. The meeting was in Dumbledore's office, McGonagall present, and Harry sat in the chair he'd sat in 3 years ago for his first real conversation with the headmaster and said, "If you change the task, Voldemort's timeline accelerates and he finds another mechanism with less predictability. We know where and when and how now. We should use that." "Harry, I am not walking into the graveyard unaware," Harry said. "I am not going to be the passive element in Voldemort's plan. I go into that maze knowing what the endpoint is and I go prepared. That is categorically different from going as the plan intends." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "You have spent 3 years waiting for this moment. I know that. I've known since first year. The difference between us is that I'm not going to walk into it because the board has been set. I'm going because I've decided to." The silence in the office was thick and particular. "What kind of prepared?" McGonagall asked, in her sharp, precise way. "I need 3 weeks. And I need someone specific with me at the maze's entrance." He wrote to Fleur that night. The letter was the longest he'd sent in 4 years. He told her everything, the portkey, the ritual, the full shape of Voldemort's plan. And at the end he wrote, "I know what the bond will do when this happens. I know you'll feel it, and I know what that will make you want to do. I need you to know that I am not asking you to stand back. I am not asking you to wait. I am asking you to be exactly where you decide to be, because that is the only version of this that I'll accept." She wrote back within the hour, which meant she'd been waiting. She wrote, "I'll be at the maze entrance. And Harry, I have been practicing something with Grandmother Celeste that was not in any curriculum I was given." She called it Veela Siege Fire. She said the last time it was used was the 1612 bond. A pause in the writing. I think she knew this was coming. He held that letter for a long time. Then he wrote back, "Of course she did." The 3 weeks went fast and hard. He trained with a focus that was different from his usual work, not academic, not theoretical, but the specific honing of someone preparing for a single defined moment. His magic was operating at a level that made Arsenault's early estimates look conservative, for years of growth and the bond's deepening influence had done exactly what the elders had predicted, his core enormous and controlled in a way that would have been exceptional in an adult and was, in a 14-year-old, something even the castle's portraits whispered about. He finished the maze in 18 minutes. Not because the obstacles were easy, they weren't. The Sphinx, the blast-ended Scrut, the Acromantula, the maze's own disorientation magic. He moved through them with the speed of someone who has been training for this specifically and who is, additionally, operating at a level of raw magical power that reduced several of the obstacles from challenges to inconveniences. He found Cedric at a junction, trapped by the maze's living walls, and freed him, because Cedric was not part of Voldemort's plan and Harry had no intention of leaving him there. He reached the Triwizard Cup. He stood before it and looked at it and felt the portkey magic in it, visible to him now in the way that magic was visible to him when he paid attention. He could not prevent the portkey from activating without destroying the cup, which would end the tournament and have consequences. He could go through it prepared. He could go through it with one specific modification that Crouch Jr. had not anticipated because nobody had anticipated Harry Potter would be informed, prepared, and willing. He looked back at the maze entrance, 400 meters away. He felt Fleur at the entrance. The bond was doing the particular thing it did when she was at full alert, not alarmed, not afraid, but present with every available layer of attention. He reached out along the bond. Not the way he had as a 10-year-old, sending vague warmth across distance. The way he could do it now, after 4 years, specific, intentional, a message with the bond as its medium. "I'm going in. Be ready." The warmth in his chest shifted, sharper, fiercer, the specific quality of Fleur Delacour when she had decided something. "Already ready. Go." He took hold of the cup. The graveyard arrived cold and dark and smelling of old stone, exactly as described. Wormtail was already there, Pettigrew, small and silver-handed and terrified in the specific way of people who know what serves what master. Harry was standing in the right position before Wormtail could move. Wand out, not wandlessly, not this time. The wand was the correct tool for the specific magical frequencies a graveyard resurrection required, and his magic running at full open, no restraint, the bloom from the orchard and the tower and 3 years of practice operating at its full scale. "Wormtail," he said, pleasantly. "Don't move." Wormtail stared at him. The silver hand was raised toward something, a bundle in the shadow of the largest headstone, wrapped, moving. "The ritual requires my blood," Harry said. "I'm aware of how it works. You're not getting it." He looked at the bundle in the shadow. "Is he awake? Can he hear me?" A sound from the bundle. Not a voice, something older and worse than a voice, something that operated in a register below language. Good, Harry said. Then you can hear this. I know what you are now. I know about the Horcruxes. Not just the fragment in my scar, all of them. My father's research was very thorough. He kept his wand on Wormtail and the full weight of his magic outward, present, not yet deployed. You have built yourself a very careful survival architecture and I am going to dismantle it. Not tonight. I'm not in a position to finish it tonight and I know the difference between what I can do and what I can't. He paused. But I want you to know that the timeline is mine now. Not yours. Not Dumbledore's. Mine. The bundle in the shadow hissed. And then the graveyard lit up. The fire came through the air from a direction that made no geometrical sense. It arrived the way Portkey transited magic arrived, tearing through whatever membrane kept the graveyard separate, and it was not the orange-red of ordinary fire. It was white and silver and moved the way liquid moves when it has pressure behind it, and it was, Harry recognized with a specific warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire's heat, Veela siege fire. 1612 bond activated, said some part of his brain that was still taking notes. Fleur landed 8 feet to his left. He had seen her angry before, had felt the bond's protective spike before, but he had not seen this. She was fully present in a way he had only read about in the Veela history book she probably didn't know he'd read 3 times, the glamour not suppressed but transformed, something past beauty into something that operated in entirely different frequency, the siege fire coiling around her hands and forearms like she'd been born holding it. She looked at Wormtail and the bundle and the graveyard with the single focused attention of something ancient. Hello, she said, to the bundle in the shadow, very quietly. I have wanted to meet you for quite some time. The hissing from the bundle changed register. Harry, she said, not looking at him. Yes. Are we finishing this tonight or are we leaving? He assessed, Wormtail, the bundle, the graveyard's isolation wards, his own energy levels, the absence of the resurrection ritual's required elements now that Wormtail had not moved, the state of Voldemort's current form. Not yet. Not enough information about the remaining Horcruxes. We're leaving, he said. For now. Acceptable, she said, with the tone of someone who is filing this under temporary. She sent one clean pulse of siege fire at the bundle in the shadow, not to destroy, but to communicate, in the way Veela magic communicated when it wanted to make a point, and Harry turned the Portkey back to Hogwarts with the modification he'd built in 3 weeks earlier and they were gone. They arrived on the Hogwarts lawn. The maze was still running. The sky was full of stars. He stood in the grass and felt the adrenaline doing its work and felt the bond between them blazing like a signal fire. She stood 2 feet away, the siege fire receding into her hands, and she was breathing hard in the controlled way of someone bringing themselves back down from something very high. He looked at her. She looked at him. You built a return into the Portkey, she said. 3 weeks of preparation. The bond, when you went through, I know. I felt you at the entrance. It was, she stopped. Started again. It was very loud. Yes. She looked at the stars for a moment. Then back at him. He knows now that we're coming. Yes. And he knows about your father's research. Yes. He paused. I wanted him to know. I want him building his plan around the correct information for once instead of the version where I'm the passive element. She looked at him for a long moment. The siege fire was entirely gone now and she was just Fleur again, silver-haired, precise, standing on a Scottish lawn at midnight. The 1612 bond, she said. He met her eyes. Yes. The book says, I know what the book says. We should talk about it. We will, he said. When this is over. Properly. He held her gaze with the honesty they'd agreed on 4 years ago in an orchard. There are things I don't want to say while we're still in the middle of it. Her expression did something very quiet and very real. "All right," she said. "When it's over." She looked at the castle. "Your friends will be worried. Ron will be frantic. Hermione will be managing Ron being frantic, which is worse for her." "Go," she said. He went 3 steps toward the castle and then turned back. "Fleur." She looked at him. "I'm glad you came," he said. "Not because of the bond. Because it was you." The quiet thing happened in her expression again. "Then, go, Harry." He went. Chapter 6. What was always coming. The summer after 4th year was different. Not in the way that things are different when they resolve. Harry had learned enough by now to know that nothing with Voldemort resolved cleanly, that every chapter ended with the next one already in motion. It was different in the way that the air changes after a storm that hasn't quite broken yet. The pressure's still there. The sky's still wrong. But something had shifted in the architecture of it, and everyone who paid attention could feel that the old arrangements were ending. The Ministry spent the summer denying this loudly, which was how Harry knew it was true. He was at the Delacour house in Bordeaux from the 1st of July. This was not new. He had spent part of every summer here since he was 9, and the house had accumulated his presence the way old houses accumulate the people who matter to them, his height marks on the orchard doorframe from years of Gabrielle insisting on tracking his growth, the advanced magical theory texts on the shelf in his room with his own annotation margins filling the white space, the particular chair at the kitchen table that had gradually, unremarked, become his. What was different this summer was the quality of the waiting. He was 14 going on 15 and Fleur had turned 21 in late June, and the bond had been doing something for the last 2 years that neither of them had addressed directly, building pressure in the specific patient way of things that intend to be acknowledged eventually regardless of whether you help them along. He had told her in the graveyard field that there were things he didn't want to say until it was over, and it wasn't over, and that deferral was beginning to have a weight of its own. He ran in the mornings. The orchard, the hills behind, the vineyard rose that went silver in the early light. It was physical in a way that his magical training wasn't, uncomplicated, rhythmic, the kind of work that let the mind run without direction. Fleur ran sometimes too, in the same routes but at different hours, and they passed each other occasionally on the vineyard path with the specific ease of people who have been in each other's peripheral vision long enough that it no longer requires management. Apolline watched them both with the particular expression she had lately, which Fleur called Maman's waiting face and which Harry interpreted as a woman who had watched a very slow-developing situation for several years and had decided patience was the correct posture. The research continued. Harry's father's papers from the 7th-level Gringotts vault had taken 2 years to fully map and decode. James Potter's handwriting was enthusiastic in a way that occasionally suggested urgency had overtaken legibility, and what they had assembled by July was a nearly complete picture of Voldemort's Horcrux architecture. 7 anchors total. 4 identified and located. 3 still requiring research. He worked on this at the kitchen table in the mornings, after running, before the rest of the house woke. It was his preferred thinking time, the house in the particular quiet of early light, the cats arranged on the windowsill, his notes spread across the table in the system he'd developed, connected by logic, not by subject, the web of it visible when you looked at the whole rather than the parts. Fleur found him at the table on the 4th morning. She came down at 6:15 in running clothes, hair loose, and looked at the notes spread across the table and said nothing for a moment. She made coffee. She put a cup by his elbow. She sat across from him and looked at the notes with the direct attention she gave to things that required solving. "Where are you?" she said. "The locket. It should be at a place called Grimmauld Place, Sirius's family home. The Black family had several dark objects in the house and the locket fits the signature." He moved a sheet of parchment. "The ring is more complicated. There's a location in Little Hangleton that comes up repeatedly in the research, a Gaunt family property. The magic there is old and heavily cursed. The ring itself has a curse on it that my father flagged specifically." He looked up. He wrote "Do not touch without preparation" 3 times underlined. Which suggests the obvious danger is not the Horcrux but whatever else is on it. A killing curse. Almost certainly. A delayed one, something that progresses. He looked at his notes. Which means someone who finds the ring and tries to destroy it through conventional contact will die, just slowly. Dumbledore, she said. He looked at her. He'll find it before we do if we're not fast enough, she said. He's been moving. I've been tracking the Council's intelligence on his movements and he's visited 3 locations in the last 6 months that overlap with your mapping. She picked up her coffee. He knows about the Horcruxes. He's been working toward them independently. He's known longer than we have, Harry said. Probably since the war ended. He would have examined Voldemort's trajectory in the years before and worked backward from the specific impossibility of what a killing curse rebound should do to a body. He paused. He's been building toward a controlled endpoint where all the Horcruxes are destroyed and then I face Voldemort in circumstances he's managed. He looked at his notes and then at her. The scar. She was very still. The scar is the 7th, he said. I've been circling it for a year and I keep coming back to it. The mathematics are consistent. 7 objects, 7 soul fragments, the diary riddle used in 2nd year, the ring, the locket, the Hufflepuff cup which is probably at Gringotts, something connected to Ravenclaw, the snake. And me. He said it with the same even tone he used for everything factual and difficult. There's a reason Voldemort's curse rebounded and left a mark. There's a reason my magic is architectured the way it is, the wrongness the hat felt, the thing that feels like an off note when my power goes very large. The fragment of his soul has been affecting my magical development since I was 1 year old. Fleur was holding her coffee cup with both hands and looking at him. The bond, she said. Yes. The guardian bond is anchored to me, which means it's adjacent to it. The Veela protective magic built itself around everything in me, including the fragment. He met her gaze. Which means when the fragment is removed, the bond will change. We don't know how. We should ask the elders. I've already written to Grandmere Celeste. He paused. She wrote back in 40 minutes, which is the fastest letter she's ever sent me. What did she say? She said the bond will survive it. She said the bond is anchored to me, not to the magical signatures in me, which is a distinction she was very particular about. He looked at his coffee. She also said, and I want you to know she said this, not me, that a guardian bond that survives the removal of a Horcrux fragment from the bonded individual will move into its final phase. The phase the 1612 bond reached. The kitchen was very quiet. The cats on the windowsill shifted. Outside, the vineyard rose ran silver to the horizon. Fleur set her coffee cup down. Harry, she said. Yes. How long have you known about the scar being the 7th? Confirmed? Since April. Suspected since 2nd year. He held her gaze. I didn't tell you because I needed to be certain before I said it. I was not going to tell you something that consequential and be wrong. She was looking at him with the expression she almost never let happen, the undefended one, the one that was all the things they had been carefully managing for years arranged plainly on her face without mediation. The endpoint, she said. The way Dumbledore has this planned, he thinks I have to die, Harry said. Or choose to. He thinks the fragment can only be removed if I go willingly to Voldemort and take the killing curse. He's been building toward a moment where I accept this as necessary. He paused. He's wrong. You're certain. My father spent a year researching this and he was not a man who accepted the first solution. He found an alternative. It's incomplete, he died before he could test it, but the theoretical foundation is there. He moved a sheet of notes. The fragment can be extracted. It requires a specific combination of magic that Voldemort himself designed for a different purpose, the same soul magic underlying the Horcrux creation inverted. You separate the foreign fragment from the host soul by making the host soul's magic incompatible with the fragment's adhesion. What makes a soul's magic incompatible with a Horcrux fragment's adhesion? He looked at her. She looked at him. No, she said. Yes. That is, she stopped. Looked at the table. Looked back at him. That requires the bond to be in its final phase. Yes. Which requires, yes. Harry, we are 15 and 21, I know what it requires, he said, very quietly. I know the mathematics. I know the timeline. I am not asking you to do anything on my schedule or the bond schedule or Dumbledore's schedule. He held her gaze with every piece of the directness that was his most fundamental quality. I am telling you what the theoretical foundation of my father's research suggests. What we do with it is a decision we make together when we are both standing in front of it clearly. The silence held for a long moment. When, she said. Voldemort is regaining strength. He'll move within the year, he needs a physical form capable of sustaining himself, and he'll prioritize that over careful planning, which means he'll make mistakes. We have time but not unlimited time. He paused. I want the Horcruxes destroyed before he's at full capability. All of them except the scar. And the scar last, on our terms. She was quiet for what felt like a long time. Then, show me your father's notes. He showed her his father's notes. They spent the morning at the kitchen table, and she was extraordinary at this, was the thing. She brought a quality of mind to the theoretical framework that found angles in it Harry had missed, asked questions that clarified rather than complicated, made connections between the Veela siege fire mechanics and the soul separation theory that sent Harry back through 3 sheets of parchment to revise an assumption he'd held for 6 months. By the time Apolline came downstairs at 8:30 they had filled 4 pages of new notes, and Harry had the specific slightly dazed feeling of having had his thinking improved significantly. Apolline looked at the notes spread across her kitchen table. She looked at both of them. She said nothing, made herself coffee, and sat at the end of the table with the expression that was not quite "I told you so" but was its more dignified cousin. We need to move on the locket first, Harry said. Grimmauld Place. Sirius has been trying to get back into the house for 2 years, he's been living there since the trial cleared him, but the dark objects are still. He'll let us, Fleur said. He will. And he'll want to help. Sirius was another complicated chapter, the 3rd year unraveling and rewinding, the months of difficult, careful relationship building with a man who had lost 12 years and kept mistaking Harry for his father in the dark. They had found a way to each other eventually. It was still tender in the specific way of things recently healed. I'll write to him today. The ring is more dangerous, Fleur said. Little Hangleton. The curse on it, I need to prepare an extraction ward before we touch it. Something that isolates the curse's activation mechanism. He looked at his notes. I've been working on the theoretical framework. 2 more weeks and I think I have a reliable containment. 2 weeks, Apolline said, from the end of the table. They both looked at her. She looked at her coffee. 2 weeks. Then we go together. Maman, I am a 3/4 Veela with 40 years of magical experience and a very strong motivation, Apolline said pleasantly. You are not leaving me out of this. Harry looked at Fleur. Fleur looked at Harry. 2 weeks, Harry agreed. The Horcrux hunt had a different quality than everything that had come before. It was not the reactive quality of first year's corridor or the second year's chamber, situations that had arrived fully formed and required immediate navigation. This was constructed, intentional, the shape of a plan assembled across 4 years of careful work, and Harry moved through it with the particular confidence of someone who has had time to choose their ground. Grimmauld Place first, in the 3rd week of July. The house was exactly as unpleasant as Sirius had described, 12 years of dark magic embedded in the walls, the portrait of Walburga Black in the hallway that needed 3 progressive silencing charms before it stopped screaming, the general atmosphere of a building that had been a repository for things that should not exist. Sirius met them at the door with the combination of haunted restlessness and defiant energy that was his characteristic mode and embraced Harry briefly, clapped him on the shoulder, and said, "Right. What are we doing?" "Finding a locket," Harry said. "The Black family had 40 years of accumulated dark objects in this house," Sirius said. "Narrow it down." Harry described the locket's magical signature, the specific quality of contained soul magic, dense and old, the particular coldness that Horcrux objects emanated. Sirius looked at him for a moment, with the expression he sometimes had of seeing James rather than Harry, and then blinked it away and said, "Drawing room. Second floor. There's a cabinet." The cabinet was locked with 4 separate curses, which Fleur dismantled with the focused precision of someone who has been trained by the most technically accomplished Veela elder alive. Inside, objects of varying degrees of wrongness, a dark artifact collection assembled by generations of a family that had confused power with worth. And in the back, in a small velvet bag, a locket. Gold. Heavy. With a serpentine S on the front. Harry felt it before he opened the bag, the specific cold press of it, the thing that wasn't quite consciousness but was the closest thing to it that evil could manage without a body. He did not touch it with his hands. He used the containment ward he'd developed over the past year, a layered isolation field applied wandlessly, enveloping the locket in magical insulation before anything could reach toward him. The fragment in his scar responded to the locket's proximity with the off-note sensation he'd learned to identify, like 2 discordant frequencies recognizing each other. He applied the destruction sequence his father had outlined, soul fragment separation first, through the same inversion principle, the soul within too thin and old to resist a properly constructed dispersal, and then physical destruction of the object, which Fleur handled with a concentrated pulse of siege fire that reduced the locket to a precise, controlled destruction and left a scorch mark on the drawing room floor. The cold went out of the room. Sirius stood in the doorway watching and said nothing for a moment. Then, that was one of the objects. Yes. One of the things keeping him, tethered. Yes. Sirius was quiet. He looked at where the locket had been, at the scorch mark on the ancient wooden floor. "How many are there?" "7 total. This is the second destroyed." He paused. "The diary was first. Second year." "Of course it was," Sirius said, in the tone of a man who has spent 4 years updating his assessment of what Harry Potter is capable of and has not yet reached the ceiling. "The ring was 2 days later." The gaunt property in Little Hangleton was ruins, a collapsed stone building in a field of strangling weeds, the magic of it wrong in the specific generational way of places where dark things have been practiced across many decades. Harry walked the perimeter before approaching, reading the curse architecture of the place the way Arsenault had taught him to read magical environments, identifying the layers, old blood magic, poverty-warped resentment turned to darkness, and at the center, something much colder and more deliberate. The ring was under the floorboards of what remained of the interior, inside a stone basin that had been inscribed with Voldemort's own warding work. Sophisticated, Harry thought, studying it. Designed by someone brilliant and thorough, built to outlast its creator's absence. The killing curse on the ring was constructed as a trap, activated by direct magical contact, delayed onset, designed to kill slowly enough that the victim would not connect cause and effect. Harry spent 40 minutes dismantling the activation mechanism before he allowed anyone else to enter the structure. Then the same destruction sequence, isolation, dispersal, siege fire. The ring's Horcrux fragment went differently than the locket, it resisted harder, the soul piece older and more consolidated, and for approximately 3 seconds Harry felt the off-note in his scar flare hard as the fragment's dissolution disturbed whatever frequency all the Horcrux pieces operated on collectively. He kept the isolation field steady through it and the resistance collapsed and then it was done. 4 left. The cup at Gringotts, Ravenclaw's diadem somewhere in Hogwarts itself, the snake, and the scar. In August Dumbledore came to Bordeaux. Harry had expected this. Dumbledore's intelligence network was extensive and he'd have noted the locket's destruction and connected it to Harry's known research trajectory. He arrived on a Thursday afternoon with his half-moon spectacles and his expression of careful warmth, and was shown into the sitting room by Apolline, who offered tea with the specific graciousness of a woman fully aware that this conversation was going to be a negotiation. Harry sat in the armchair. Fleur sat beside him, not physically close, but present in the deliberate way that meant she was here as a party to this conversation, not a witness to it. Dumbledore took note of this and made a very small adjustment. "You've been moving faster than I anticipated," Dumbledore said. "Yes," Harry said. "The locket. The ring." Dumbledore looked at him over his spectacles. "You know about the Horcruxes?" "I've known the theoretical framework since second year. My father's research provided the specifics." Apolline arranged access to the 7th-level vault. Dumbledore's gaze went to Apolline briefly. She met it with complete tranquility. "Harry," Dumbledore said, returning to him. "I want to be honest with you. I'd appreciate that. There are aspects of this situation that are," he paused, and Harry watched him choose between several versions of the next sentence. "There are aspects that I believe require a specific endpoint. One that I have been reluctant to share because of its nature." "The scar," Harry said. Dumbledore went still. "You believe I have to die," Harry said. "Or choose to die. You've been working toward a version of this where I walk willingly to Voldemort and accept the killing curse to destroy the fragment. You've been building that endpoint for 5 years, possibly more." He held the old man's gaze. "You're wrong. Harry, my father worked out the alternative," Harry said. "It's not complete, he died before he finished it. But I've completed it." He said it without triumph, without hardness. It was simply what was true. The fragment can be extracted through soul separation magic. It requires specific conditions, which I have, and a specific magical mechanism, which I'm prepared for. I do not have to die." Dumbledore looked at him for a very long moment. Something moved through the blue eyes, something complicated, layered, with what Harry recognized over a lifetime of learning to read him as genuine emotion underneath the management. Relief, possibly. And something else, an adjustment, the specific shift of a man who has held a terrible plan as necessary for years, discovering that it might not be. "You're certain," Dumbledore said. "Yes. The theoretical basis is solid. I'll share the notes if you want to verify them. But I'm not waiting for your verification to proceed." He paused. "What I want from you is information. The diadem is in Hogwarts, Ravenclaw's diadem." "Where specifically?" Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "Then, the room of requirement. There is a room within it, the room of hidden things, where students have concealed objects for centuries. The diadem has been there since the 15th century. "Good," Harry said. "And the snake, Nagini, she'll be with Voldemort when he moves, which means she's last." "Yes. Then we have a sequencing problem. The cup at Gringotts, the diadem at Hogwarts, the snake and the scar at the final confrontation." He looked at Dumbledore. "I need Gringotts' access for the cup without triggering the bank's security systems. Can your relationship with the Goblin Nation facilitate that?" Dumbledore regarded him with an expression Harry had seen develop over 4 years, the specific look of a man who has been accustomed to being the architect and is learning, not without difficulty, to be a participant. "I believe I can arrange a meeting with Ragnarok," Dumbledore said. "Good." Harry stood up. "I'll tell you the plan's shape when I need you in it. What I'm asking right now is for information and access, not strategy." He looked at the old man steadily, without challenge but without apology. "We're past the point where this gets managed without me." Another pause. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "We are." Gringotts in late August had a different quality than Gringotts on a busy Friday in September. The arrangement Dumbledore facilitated with Ragnarok was efficient and specific, access to a vault on the basis of a declared dark artifact emergency, the curse-breaking team on standby, Ragnarok himself present as an acknowledgement that this was not standard procedure but was sanctioned. The cup was in Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, which Harry had expected and which created its own complications. Breaking Lestrange's vault security without triggering wider bank alarms required the curse-breaking team's active cooperation, which Ragnarok provided with the air of an institution that has been waiting for someone to handle this properly. The cup's fragment was older than the locket's, angrier. It pushed at Harry's scar fragment with the force of pieces drawn to their own, and Harry held the isolation field with both hands and the full weight of his concentration, and Fleur held siege fire ready at his shoulder, and the dispersal was harder than either of the others and left him breathing hard when it was done. Fleur looked at him. "All right?" "Yes." He straightened. The scar flared. "It's settled." "It's fine." She looked at him for another second. "It's fine," he said. "Let's go." The diadem was in October, at the start of term. Harry returned to Hogwarts with the particular sense of the place as a space he had mapped thoroughly and knew as well as the Bordeaux house, the castle's rhythms, its moods, the ways it communicated with people who paid attention to it. He had told Hermione everything over the summer. She had received the full outline of the Horcrux architecture and the extraction plan and his father's research with the expression of someone being handed a very complex problem and told it is her favorite kind. She had spent 3 days in the Hogwarts library and then come back with 2 additions to the extraction theory that improved it. Harry added them to the notes. Hermione looked at the notes afterward and said, very quietly, "Your father was brilliant." "Yes," Harry said. He was still figuring it out. "You finished it." "We finished it," he said, which included the notes spread across the table in Bordeaux and the mornings in the kitchen and Fleur's 4 pages of new thinking and Arsenault's foundational teaching. It wasn't just me. The room of hidden things was exactly what Dumbledore had described, a cavern of accumulated centuries, objects stacked and forgotten, the particular preserved quality of a place that exists between use and abandonment. The diadem was on the head of a stone bust near the back, placed there with the carelessness of something that had been hidden too long ago for anyone to remember its weight. Harry found it, dismantled the passive curse work around it that Rowena Ravenclaw's own magic had left as a preservation ward, and destroyed the Horcrux fragment in the quiet of the room with only Hermione present as witness. When the fragment dispersed, the off note in his scar sang a single clear tone and then went flat. He stood very still for a moment. "Harry?" Hermione said. "The others are gone," he said. "Whatever connection they had to each other, I can feel it. It's quieter in here now." He touched his scar briefly. "Just the one left." She looked at him. Her eyes were bright in the particular way they got when she was holding something difficult steady. "When?" she said. "Spring," he said. "He'll move in spring. He's been building capacity all year, the Ministry infiltration, the Death Eater reorganization. He'll try for a decisive moment when he has enough controlled territory to eliminate witnesses." He looked at the empty stone bust. "We'll let him think he's choosing the moment. He won't be." Hermione was quiet for a moment. "Then, the extraction. You and Fleur, yes. The bond's final phase. Yes." She absorbed this with the composure of someone who had been told in August and had spent 2 months coming to terms with it. "And after?" "The confrontation with Voldemort, the snake, one problem at a time," Harry said. "The snake first. Then whatever's left of him." The winter passed in work and preparation and the particular quality of time that feels both fast and deliberate when you can see the shape of what's coming. Fleur returned to France after Christmas, but the letters were different that winter, not quite what they'd been for years, not the easy back and forth of 2 people thinking together across distance. There was something between the lines that had always been there but was closer to the surface now, less patient. He thought about the kitchen table in August. He thought about what his father's notes had laid out as the conditions for the extraction. He thought about the 1612 bond and what the Veela history book said it had become. He wrote, "After spring. That's when I want to talk about the things we've been not talking about for 5 years." She wrote back, "I've been waiting for you to say that since you were 12. He read the letter twice, folded it carefully, and put it in the inner pocket of his jacket where the bond's warmth sat closest. Spring came the way the elders had said it would, the way inevitable things come, not unexpectedly but with a specific weight of arrival. Voldemort moved in April. He came for Hogwarts because Hogwarts was what Harry had, and taking it was both tactical and symbolic, the school as the site of his first defeat, the castle as the place Harry called home. He came with Death Eaters and with Nagini and with the accumulated momentum of a year of careful rebuilding, and he came expecting to dictate terms. He found the castle ready. This was not the scramble of defensive improvisation, the order arriving barely in time, students in the corridors, everything reactive and costly. Harry had spent the winter working with Dumbledore and McGonagall and the faculty on the castle's wards, identifying every weakness, building every defense, briefing the older students who volunteered to understand what was actually coming rather than the official ministry version. When the wards registered the first Death Eater approach at midnight on April 3, the castle closed like a fist. Harry stood at the entrance hall with Ron at his left and Hermione at his right and felt the battles shape through the castle's own wards, his attunement to the building's magic deep enough after 5 years that it communicated clearly, like weather on his skin. Death Eaters at the East Gate. Perimeter breach attempt at the boathouse. 3 apparition attempts into the ward boundaries, all rejected. Fleur had come 2 days early. She was on the ramparts with the Beauxbatons contingent who had come because she had told them what was happening and asked who was willing, and 14 of them had said yes, which said something about her and about them. The battle had a momentum that Harry moved with rather than against, not passive, but fluid, the specific quality of someone who has trained for something long enough that their response is instinctive rather than decided. He moved through the castle in the first hour clearing corridors, coordinating the castle's defensive magic with his own, using the bond to track Fleur's position the way he'd track his own hands, always aware of the specific warmth direction of her even when the castle's noise and magic made everything else uncertain. He found Nagini at midnight. She was in the corridor outside the Great Hall, separated from Voldemort in the chaos of the battle. He'd expected this, had planned for the separation, knowing that Voldemort's protective instinct toward the snake would eventually be outweighed by his tactical pressure to engage Harry directly. The snake was large and moved with the particular terrible intelligence of something with a piece of Voldemort's soul inside it, and Harry faced it in the corridor with his wand and without hesitation. The basilisk fang he'd kept from second year. Hermione had researched its application, venom capable of destroying Horcrux-adjacent magic, concentrated into a single-use extraction via a containment process she'd developed over 3 months. Applied in the right sequence with the dispersal ward, it unmade the soul fragment in the snake without requiring physical destruction of the snake itself, which was relevant because Harry was not going to kill a snake that was also a victim of Voldemort's magic if the snake could be spared. Nagini collapsed. The Horcrux fragment dispersed. In his scar, the off-note sang its one clear tone and stretched toward silence. He felt Voldemort before he saw him, the specific cold of the man, the particular magical frequency that Harry's scar had been attuned to for 15 years. He turned and Voldemort was at the end of the corridor, tall and wrong in the way he was always wrong, a body built for return rather than living, and his eyes were red and his wand was raised. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said. The name had its own specific quality when he said it, not contempt, not affection, but the specific attention of someone who has spent 15 years thinking about one problem. "Tom," Harry said. The name landed. Voldemort's eyes did something fractional and involuntary. "Most of them are gone," Harry said. He held his wand at his side rather than raised. "The diary, the ring, the locket, the cup, the diadem, the snake. That's 6. He met the red eyes. "You can feel it. The architecture collapsing inward. Everything you built to outlast your body, coming apart." "There is one remaining," Voldemort said. "Yes. Harry touched his scar lightly. And that's not a weapon for you anymore. I know what's there. I know how to remove it. And I will. Voldemort raised his wand. And then you'll die, Voldemort said, with the specific certainty of someone who has held a belief long enough that it has become structural. When the fragment is removed, I won't die, Harry said. You've been wrong about that from the beginning. You built your immortality architecture on the assumption that a 1-year-old survival was luck. It wasn't luck. He raised his own wand now. It was this. And he showed him. Not the full bloom, that was not what this required. What this required was the specific expression of a magic that had been alive and growing for 15 years, that had survived 8 years of suppression and emerged from the other side of it larger than before, that had been attuned and deepened and amplified by 4 years of the Guardian Bond's influence and Fleur's Veela inheritance running parallel to it. He opened it, fully, the way he had never opened it in a fight, not targeted, not weaponized, just present, the total expression of what he was magically, and he let Voldemort feel the size of it. Tom Riddle looked at Harry Potter and for the first time in 15 years, something happened in his expression that Harry recognized. Uncertainty. You chose wrong, Harry said, very quietly. In 1981. You saw a prophecy about a child who might defeat you and you went to kill the child instead of understanding the child. And in going to kill me, you created the exact thing you were trying to prevent. He kept his magic open and present. Lily Potter's protection made your curse rebound. But it also imprinted you on me. Your soul fragment has been living in mine for 15 years and my magic has been building itself around it, and whatever you put in me you also gave me, a direct line to your power, your instincts, your knowledge of the dark arts. Every time I've faced something connected to you I have known, on some level, exactly how it worked, because the piece of you inside me knew. He paused. You educated me. It's one of the more interesting mistakes you made. Voldemort's wand hand was completely steady. His face was completely controlled. But something in the magical atmosphere of the corridor had changed, the pressure of him, the dominant coldness that had characterized every encounter Harry had had with him since the graveyard, was encountering resistance of a kind it had not encountered before. The fight was fast and it was not what the stories would later describe. It was not a dramatic duel with spectacular exchanges of light. It was the specific collision of two magical systems that had been built in opposition for 15 years, and it was settled not by who was more powerful in a vacuum but by who had better information about the other, and Harry had spent 5 years specifically ensuring that advantage was his. He did not try to kill Voldemort. He did not try to use the killing curse or its equivalents, which he could have, which the power was there for, which some part of him recognized could end this in seconds but would also end it in a way that would have consequences he had thought carefully about and rejected. What he did instead was apply force, targeted, precise, overwhelming, to the magical architecture Voldemort operated through, the constructed systems of a man who had outsourced so much of his magical capacity to his Horcruxes that without them his own reserves were considerably diminished. He dismantled the offensive capacity, systematically, the way you dismantle a ward, layer by layer, structure by structure, until what remained was a man with a wand and no particular advantage. Voldemort fell. Not dead. Stripped, diminished, the immortality architecture in ruins, the constructed body failing in the specific way of something that required dark magic to maintain and whose dark magic was gone. He fell and his wand skittered across the corridor floor and Harry stood over him and looked at what was left of Tom Riddle and felt, not triumph, exactly. Something more complicated. The particular flat feeling of something enormous being finished. He heard footsteps at both ends of the corridor. From one end, Dumbledore, and McGonagall, and Kingsley Shacklebolt who had come with the order. From the other end, Fleur. She was breathing hard and there was siege fire still in her hands, going out, her hair loose from its clip, and she looked at Voldemort on the floor and at Harry standing and at the corridor between them and she said, at normal conversational volume, "Are you hurt?" "No," he said. She came to him, crossed the corridor in 10 strides, and looked at him with the specific intensity of the bond running full pressure, checking everything, and he held still for it because that was what she needed. "The scar," she said. "Still there. It's different. With the others gone, the fragment is," he searched for it. "Quieter. Less coherent. I think destroying the others destabilized it." "How long?" Dumbledore asked, from behind him. Harry looked at Voldemort on the floor, at the ruins of 15 years of plans. "A week," he said. "Maybe less. The fragment is cohering without the others to anchor the network. We need to do the extraction before it adapts." Fleur looked at him. "Soon," he said, meaning more than just the timeline. "Yes," she said, meaning the same. The week after the battle was strange in the way aftermath is always strange, the world recalibrating around a thing that had defined it for so long. Voldemort in Ministry containment, his capacity to act reduced but not yet entirely gone, the fragment in Harry's scar still present and quieting. The Daily Prophet running headlines it had been unable to run for 15 years. The wizarding world doing the slow, uncertain work of learning to exist without the shape of the threat at its center. Harry spent most of it at Hogwarts, working the preparation with Hermione and Fleur, the three of them in the library with his father's notes and Fleur's correspondence with Grandmere Celeste and Hermione's organizational discipline holding all of it together. The extraction theory was complete. The mechanism was understood. The conditions were real, and present, and neither he nor Fleur was performing uncertainty about them anymore. On the 5th evening, he and Fleur walked the lake path. The sky was the specific early May gold that made Hogwarts look like something that existed in a story, which it did and didn't simultaneously. The water was flat and still. The grounds were beginning to recover from the battle, magic and care already returning growth to the scorched patches near the east gate. They walked and did not fill the silence immediately. After, Fleur said. "Yes. The things we've been not talking about." "Yes." She looked at the lake. "You are 15. "Yes." "I am 21. "Yes." "In 3 years you will be 18. "Yes." He held her gaze when she looked at him. "I know the timeline. I've known it for a long time. I'm not asking you to do anything the timeline doesn't support. The bond's final phase doesn't require, I know what it requires," he said. "And I know what it doesn't. The extraction works through the bond's orientation, not through any specific action." Celeste was very clear about the distinction. He paused. "The final phase is what happens after. What the bond becomes when there's no fragment complicating it." He looked at the lake. "I want to know what that is. With you. When we're both standing in it without 15 years of war as the context." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, what if it's terrifying?" He looked at her. "Is it?" She considered this honestly, the way she considered everything. "No," she said. "That's the part I've been managing around. It's not terrifying. She stopped, and the smile happened, real and unguarded and very briefly visible. "It's the least frightening thing I know." "Yes," Harry said. "That's accurate." They stood at the lake's edge and the bond was warm and enormous and entirely itself, no longer managed or deferred, and the water caught the evening light and made it something else. 3 years, Fleur said. 3 years, he agreed. "And then we have the rest of it." The extraction happened on a Thursday. Grandmere Celeste came from France and did not pretend she hadn't been waiting for this. She and Hermione assembled the framework, the theoretical and the practical held in precise balance, the two of them moving around each other with the shared respect of two people who know their respective expertise and are not interested in competition. Apolline was there. Sirius was there, standing at the room's edge with the quality he had sometimes of needing to witness things he'd almost not survived to see. Harry sat in the center. Fleur opposite him. The bond between them visible now in a way it had never been in daylight, gold-silver, the specific light of very old protective magic fully activated, the Guardian in its final alignment. The extraction was, not painless, exactly. The fragment had been in his scar for 15 years and leaving was not a simple process. It took 40 minutes of concentrated work, the mechanism running through the bond, Fleur's Veela magic functioning as the incompatible to fragment adhesion element that his father's theory had identified, and there was a point in the middle of it where something very old and cold and not Harry screamed in the register below language and tried to hold. Harry opened his magic fully and simply did not permit it. The fragment left. The silence afterward was the cleanest silence Harry had ever experienced. He sat in it for a moment and took a full inventory of himself, all the way down, the off-note gone, the 15-year accompaniment of something that wasn't him finally absent, and what remained was just his own magic, enormous and clear and entirely his own. He looked at Fleur. She was looking at him with the undefended expression, and her eyes were very bright, and the bond between them it was the bond without anything in it that didn't belong. Without the war's weight, without the fragment's interference, without the managed careful distance of 5 years of choosing the right time. It was simply what it was. What it had been trying to be since the day it ignited in a cupboard under some stairs at number 4, Privet Drive, when a half-Veela girl had grabbed a door frame and a 9-year-old boy with green eyes had asked if she was all right. Well, Grandmere Celeste said, from across the room, in her dry and ancient voice. There it is. Harry laughed. It came out of nowhere and it was entirely real, and then Fleur laughed, and Apolline sat down heavily in a chair and pressed one hand over her eyes and made a sound that was either laughing or crying or both simultaneously. Sirius said, "Someone explain what just happened." Later, Harry said. He looked at Fleur. She looked at him. 15 years old, 21 years old, the war behind them for the first time and the rest of it in front. "The things we haven't said," he said. "Yes," she said. "All of them. We have time." "Yes." She looked at the room around them, Apolline laughing crying, Celeste with the expression that was as close to satisfied as a 143-year-old woman allowed herself, Hermione pressing her hand over her mouth, Sirius confused and invested simultaneously. "We have all the time there is." Outside, the Hogwarts grounds were gold and green in the May light. The lake caught the morning and held it. The apple trees in Bordeaux would be blossoming by now, 300 miles south. The cats would be on the steps. The kitchen table would have a particular empty quality that was also a particular waiting quality, and in 3 years it would be full again. Harry walked out of the room and into the corridor and felt his own magic running clear and enormous in his chest for the first time in his life, and thought, this is what comes next. He was not afraid of what comes next. He had never been afraid of it. For Gabrielle, who braided grass into someone's hair in an orchard and understood, at 6 years old, exactly what she was doing.